Hey guys, tonight we embark on a journey beneath the very ground you walk. Literally. Imagine you're crouched in a dusty trench, the moonlight whispering across ancient bricks that haven't seen daylight in over 4 millennia. You might not survive the first day of poking around Bronze Age foundations. Those loose stones could shift under your weight, so keep your wits about you. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're down there with me, drop a comment telling me which city you're tuning in from and what time it is where you are. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Morning light filters through a makeshift tarp overhead, illuminating a long, straight line of reddish-brown bricks set into clay-rich soil. Faint ridges along each block reveal the fingertip impressions of craftsmen who molded them by hand, their tools long since vanished. At first glance, this looks like any common wall, but as you brush away layers of golden sand, you discover it stretches farther and straighter than natural collapse would allow. The emergence of the structure tells you that you stand before the buried remains of a city from the Indus Valley civilization, dating roughly to 2600 to 1900 BCE. Careful trowel strokes uncover the corner of what once was a solid building. Mortar flecks cling stubbornly to the bricks, its composition, a blend of lime, sand, and pulverized shell, hinting at both functional and decorative purposes. In other parts of the world, builders relied on simple mud mixtures. Here, however, crushed conch and clamshells were added to brighten interior walls, producing a subtle, pearlescent sheen by torchlight. You can almost picture a chamber shimmering softly under oil lamps, perhaps in an administrative hall or the home of a wealthy merchant. Uniformity defines every block before you. Each brick measures approximately 4 by 8 by 16 inches in a perfect 4:2:1 ratio. An engineering marvel that no contemporary Roman or Egyptian city could claim at such an early date. This standardized modular system simplified planning and construction. Walls could be laid out in grid patterns, corridors plotted with mathematical precision, and entire neighborhoods erected in mere weeks rather than years. Evidence from distant sites such as Lothal and Mohenjo-Daro confirms this exact ratio, suggesting a shared building code across hundreds of miles. Molding these bricks required open-air kilns fueled by wood and cow dung, reaching temperatures near 800 degrees Celsius. Charcoal remnants found in collapsed kiln domes just beyond the trench line mark where artisans monitored each firing cycle for days on end. Wood ash mingled with clay in the surrounding soil offers silent testimony to the effort and resources invested in every batch. In contrast, sun-dried adobe bricks appear in less critical structures, conserving precious kiln fuel, a resource-intensive process that reveals an early form of environmental strategy. Subterranean channels peek out at the brick's base, hewn directly into stone slabs. These primitive drains managed rainwater and graywater, preventing basement flooding during monsoons. Over time, the system evolved into covered sewage networks, arguably the world's earliest known urban sanitation. In this very spot, you see the embryo of what would become a city-wide marvel, waterworks that rival any Bronze Age metropolis. Your gaze shifts to a stamped clay seal wedged between two courses. Imprinted with a unicorn-like creature encircled by undeciphered script, it served as an administrative tag, linking batches of bricks to merchant guilds or civic authorities. Each impression functioned like a barcode, controlling quality and distribution. Such bureaucratic sophistication is rare at this epoch. Historians are still debating this question. An adjacent niche reveals fragments of bitumen along lower brick courses, an ancient waterproofing technique possibly borrowed from Mesopotamian traditions. Its presence here underscores a culture unafraid to adopt foreign innovations when solving local challenges, such as sealing grain stores against damp monsoon air. Nearby, a shallow trough carved into the threshold stone suggests steps washed divert water away from interior floors, combining ritual and practicality. Sturdy brick piers flank the remains of a central passage, their breadth hinting at heavy wooden beams that once supported upper stories or vaulted roofs. Multi-level dwellings may have lined these streets, though evidence remains fragmentary. Small hearths found in adjacent rooms still hold charred lentil husks and mustard seed residues, an intimate glimpse of everyday cuisine. Archaeobotanical tests detect traces of spiced porridge, revealing that inhabitants enjoyed more than mere barley gruel. Further along, mortar samples yield microscopic shell shards that reflect torchlight with a gentle glimmer. Scraps of ochre and indigo pigment stick to plaster, suggesting murals or decorative borders adorned some halls. Such artistry challenges stereotypes of utilitarian Harappan design. These were spaces crafted for both utility and beauty. Gaps between brick rows mark where wooden scaffolding once supported workers aligning each course. Occasional splinters of carbonized would remain locked in mortar pockets. Dendrochronological analysis could date these timbers precisely, but with too few samples, researchers argue over whether this site predates Mohenjo-Daro's earliest layers. Historians are still debating this question. In a low bench-like structure set against a thicker wall, you find an assortment of broken pottery, fine where painted with intersecting lines and geometric motifs. Residents here likely used these vessels for storage and dining, their patterns echoing designs on seals and occasional bead jewelry unearthed nearby. The decorative consistency across media suggests shared aesthetic norms bolstered by a common civic identity. Soft echoes of the rising sun bounce off bare brick, lending the trench a cathedral-like hush. Tiny seed fragments scattered across the floor, sesame, millet, barley, hint at a grain storage area or perhaps a communal granary. You imagine workers filling sacks with harvest yields, sweeping spilled kernels. Moonlight lies along the river in a silver ribbon, a quiet thread that stitches floodplain to horizon as the monsoon haze thins and stars blink awake. Soft sand cools your ankles while you step from dune to dune, the way a cat pads along a courtyard wall, careful not to disturb what sleeps under the surface. Somewhere in the reeds, waterbirds trade small gossip, and fish send ripples that blur the sky's reflection until it looks like polished slate. Trade boats once drifted where you stand now, their hulls sighing against mooring posts, their crews whispering of distant markets and the unending patience of currents that always get where they are going. Along the slow bend, hyacinth rafts gather in green ovals, and you picture a pilot kneeling at the prow, gauging depth by feel rather than numbers. Oars dip with magician quiet. A steersman taps the stern with a palm to keep rhythm steady. Cargo rests under woven mats, bead jars padded with straw, copper ingots wrapped in reed bundles, baskets of sesame and barley crowned with a polite layer of unthreshed stalks to fool casual eyes. You breathe the sweet, clean smell of river mud and the faint tang of pitch that once sealed every seam. Beneath the ripples, silt curls like smoke and settles again, the river's eternal choreography. Sandbanks slide a little each year, then pretend they always lived exactly here. Shorelines invented patience first, your ankles learn it next. The boatmen of this valley built their day around the water's moods. Morning ferry runs to upstream villages, afternoon glides to the next bend's market, dusk moorings under tamarisk shade where laughter and trade mingle. No overseer needs to bark orders. The river itself is foreman, calendar, and compass, none of which ever calls in sick. Between reed thickets, a narrow side channel opens like a secret corridor, and you slip into its hush. Dragonflies etch spirals over the surface, and reeds lean in to eavesdrop. Back in the main current, broad hulls pass in slow procession, but here a toy-sized coracle would do, a bowl of wicker stitched with leather, light enough to carry on a shoulder when the channel decides to vanish at noon. Travelers know these capricious shortcuts by memory and proverb. One wrong curve and you deliver your sesame to a family of turtles who pay in gratitude instead of silver. Over the water's shoulder, a sandbar hosts a cluster of low warehouses. Mud brick rectangles with timber lintels and sloped roofs. Their doorways set a brick above ground against fickle floods. An overseer once kept a tally board inside, pebbles in neat rows to mark loads. One row for carnelian beads, another for cotton cloth, another for fish oil sealed in gray jars. You see the drill holes in the beads with your mind's eye, a marvel of precision made with hard-chert microdrills turned between thumb and forefinger until stones surrendered a perfect circle. Toward the far reach of the bend, a traveling guild of botrytes beaches a hull for repairs, or so your imagination insists as you study scuffed earth and a scatter of wood chips fossilized into the bank. Planks meet edge to edge, stitched together with cord passed through neatly bored holes and caulked with bitumen kneaded soft by warm hands. No iron nails, no metal clamps. Just fiber, pitch, and stubborn knowledge that water respects the handiwork of patient people. Sailcloth waits folded like a sleeping heron. When winds lift, it will rise with theatrical modesty and push the hull seaward. Across the channel, a low jetty of dressed brick protrudes into the deeper run, its angles sharp despite the river's long career in rounding edges. Here crews unloaded standardized weight stones, tiny cuboids of chert, carefully graduated in binary-like steps that let a trader measure 1 jar or 10 with equal confidence. Your fingers rehearse their heft. Small, dense, honest. A merchant places a bead string on the pan, adds weight stones like a rhythm game, and nods when balance speaks. Fairness, in this city, is not a sermon. It is a habit that fits in the palm. Behind the warehouses, a storage pit lines its belly with river clay, well kneaded and smoothed by a potter's touch. Grain once flowed into this earthen jar big enough to hide inside, and a mat door kept out most of the fussing world. You picture a stamped seal pressed into a little wad of clay and tied with reed twine across the mouth, the symbol of an ox or a fish declaring ownership with charming bluntness. Somewhere a boy memorizes these signs while fetching water, and later becomes the clerk whose quiet accuracy decides who sails and who waits. Within the green shallows, you step where skippers once tested draft by dipping a knotted cord, each knot a measure, each tug a friendly insult when the guess ran long. A cargo of copper rolls begs deeper water. A basket of beads tolerates a flatter, trickier way. You read the river like a teacher's notes left in the margin. Beware crosscurrents behind the fallen tamarind. Hug the inside line at the long curve. Never race sunset because darkness wins that contest with smug consistency. Advice like this wears no crown and receives no hymn, yet cities lean on it more than on walls. Nearby, terracotta toy boats lounge half buried at the edge of a mound. The children who launched them away grown into steersmen before the river finished one of its slower thoughts. The toys are oddly detailed. Raised prows, painted stripes, sometimes punctured to imitate bilge holes. Play echoes work as faithfully as the sky echoes water. A potter's child pretends to shout orders to invisible crew, and some days you suspect that pretend and real differ only by whether lunch has been eaten yet. Farther downstream, a great basin of brick receives a canal that glides out toward wider waters. Some call it a dockyard. Others mutter that it served irrigation or storage, or even ceremonies involving boats and blessings. The floor slopes with mathematical grace. Spillways capture overflow like polite guests catching someone's dropped cloak. A ramp offers carts a dignified descent, and ringstones line the quay where ropes once tightened with a sailor's knack. Historians are still debating this question, and you find a certain comfort in that. Rivers dislike final answers. Instead of monuments to kings, this valley builds monuments to flow. Signs of royal ego are scarce, but attention lavished on canals, levees, and floodgates makes the heart of the city beat as surely as any drum. A simple earthen embankment, tamped with layers of clay, turns a jealous torrent into a generous irrigation stream. You run a palm along hardened silt and imagine long lines of neighbors repairing weak segments together, each carrying baskets of dirt from pits shared without fuss or speeches. Perhaps the strangest cargo is sound. Flutes carved from reed, drums snug with goat skin, anklets that ring like small intentions. When boats nose into market coves, music arrives with them, winding melodies that bind strangers into a loose family for an afternoon. A bead seller lifts her voice to advertise glints the color of pomegranate seeds. A fisherman hums at his net so the knots remember how to be knots. And somewhere a clerk recites inventory in a rhythm that makes numbers easier to stack. Meanwhile, the river writes geography in real time, revising tributaries the way a teacher edits a sentence. One channel threads away and a village withers. Another deepens and a dusty outpost becomes a hub where bullock carts queue for calm water. Sediments from seasonal floods nourish fields of millet and barley until granaries complain politely of success. The richest soil sleeps nearest the water, but also the most temperamental. Every harvest is a handshake with something that can embrace or shrug without warning. Without sailing far, traders meet worlds. Carnelian, heated to coax that famous orange red, travels from bead districts where grinders sit cross-legged and sing to keep the drill steady. Cotton cloth, light as a laugh, folds into baskets and waits for salt-laden breezes. Copper glints from ingot to axe head wherever a smith's bellows accept the invitation. Even shell bangles arrive from coasts where breakers comb the strand like fastidious barbers. When you heft a bangle here, you are also holding a rumor of tides born elsewhere. Underfoot, the shore reveals a shuffle of footprints hardened into clay. Narrow toes from children, broader ones from men who walked with splay-footed confidence after a lifetime on wet decks. A dog leaves a tidy four-petaled print. A crane stamps a hieroglyph only other cranes read fluently. When rain emptied, the sun baked these signs into a ledger no clerk intended to keep. You feel the thrill of reading sentences the world wrote by accident. Beyond the next bend, a mango grove hides a tiny shrine where boatmen once tipped oil from small lamps and left garlands the color of wine and corn. An elder murmured river blessings there, sentences tumbled smooth by decades of use. Favor our hulls, spare our cargo, persuade the eddies to be generous. The shrine is modest. No giant statues, no drama, just a respectful nod to the oldest collaborator the city has. Reverence here wears working clothes and arrives on calloused feet. Around sunset, a caravan from the interior crunches onto a shingle bank, oxen breathing steamy patience into the cooling air. Drivers stretch their backs, exchange gossip with skippers, and test each other's honesty the way dawn leaks across the floodplain like watered paint, soaking the clay pits in a pale glow that makes every footprint look freshly decided. Dragonflies stitch the air while jackals finish their gossip and vanish into scrub, leaving the fields to workers who walk with the practiced sway of people that carry weight for a living. Under the soft hush of early light, a rectangle has already been etched into the riverbank, an open wound where the freshest, fattest clay waits to be turned into the bones of streets and homes. Standards guide the hands before a single lump is lifted. A foreman snaps a knotted line taut and measures out the molding ground, not in numbers that brag but in ratios that feel right in the palm. 1 to 2 to 4. This proportion, repeated until it becomes the city's second nature, lets bricks snuggle into walls without sulking. A young apprentice jokes that the river taught the ratio because it likes things that stack neatly. Nobody argues with a teacher that carries boats on its back. Clay comes alive when tempered with sand and chopped straw, the mixture needed until it loses its sulks and remembers to be strong. Heels press, toes grip, and laughter pulls the work along as surely as a pair of oxen drag a sledge. A handful lifted high droops exactly so. Too wet and it sighs into a puddle, too dry and it cracks like old gossip. Today it holds shape and holds promise. Fingers smooth a coil along the arm of a woman who hums to keep time. A tune learned from her mother's mother, older than names but fond of them all. Molds wait like wooden frames for brief moments of perfection. Each is dusted with fine sand so the newborn brick slips free with the grace of a fish leaving a wave. Knuckles press the corners, thumbs polish the face, and excess clay is shaved away in a curl that falls to the ground and becomes tomorrow's start. A craftsman flicks one edge with a nail, satisfied by a whisper that says, "I will hold strangers together." Another flips the block onto a board, a small theater trick that never grows dull because gravity claps every time. Rows upon rows of damp bricks stretch under the sun like red-brown loaves cooling on a baker's table. Children tiptoe between them with solemn dignity, turning each at the right hour so every face gets its share of light. Clouds wander past with casual authority. Workers glance up the way sailors test wind, deciding whether to throw reed mats over the lot or trust the day's mood. By evening, the yard smells of warm earth and quiet success, and even the dogs respect the straightness of lines. Kills rise at the yard's edge, squat and purposeful, their mouths stacked with green bricks that will soon learn what heat is for. A ladder of fuel, wood, chaff, and layered dung leans against the day's ambition, ready to feed the fire's long appetite. In go the loads, carefully arranged so flames kiss every surface and then move on like attentive hosts at a crowded feast. The master firekeeper reads color like a priest reads signs. Dull ochre means patience, rose means nearly, Cherry means hold that heat steady or the batch will sulk into softness. Telltale sounds judge the firing better than any boastful measure could. A tapped brick sings a clear, tight tink when it's earned its strength. A dull thunk confesses a secret pocket of air that will betray a wall in the first jealous rain. Rejects become paving for goat paths or props for clay jars, useful still but barred from the proud company of foundations. Successful batches cool in a guarded hush, their faces deepening to the shade the river loves best. Somewhere between burnt bread and evening cloud, crews gather to mark batches with clay tokens pressed by seals. A bull's square-shouldered calm, a fish's tidy curve, a solitary horn lifted like a question. These impressions travel with stacks as proof of care and identity, little passports convincing overseers that hands were serious when they promise quality. In the distance, a conch call cuts the heat. Someone lights a lamp and mouths a short blessing for bricks about to begin their career of holding lives together. Salt, grain, and oil pass from palm to palm wages. Yes, but also the city's way of saying well done. Transport begins when the river clears its throat. Sledges creep from the yard to the bank, ropes straining against the kind of weight that persuades a person to bargain with their own breath. Oxen snort and lean. Cart wheels decide to behave. Men walk backward downhill with the certainty of people who have rehearsed calamity and refused it. At the water, barges accept the stacks and let them nestle. The crew wedges reed mats between layers so no bump starts a quarrel that hundreds of bricks would finish by leaping into the current. Patterns of laying are a quiet language the walls speak without moving their lips. Stretchers run long, headers cross the grain, and corners lock like friends who trust each other to keep secrets. The bond alternates course by course, distributing stubbornness where stress would prefer to play tyrant. Door jambs receive special courtesies. Square faces, plum hearts, because a door should open as if it means it and close as if it loves you enough to keep weather outside. Mortar breathes life into the geometry. A paste of lime and sand coaxed to the right temperament with water that remembers yesterday's work. Some masons stir in crushed shell to produce a sheen indoors. The gleam that catches firelight and multiplies it until a small lamp forgets its smallness. Where damp will gossip the loudest, bitumen mutters its waterproof oaths between the first few courses. A trick learned from lands that keep tar in their bones and shared here without jealousy. Wells punctuate courtyards with tidy circles of brick arranged like petals around a sudden blue. Trapezoidal units make the curve fall into place. The city drinks and washes and blesses in wells that speak engineering in a lullaby voice. Step down far enough and coolness holds your wrist like a friend who has seen you through the worst summer. A child drops a bucket, blushes, and learns about knots, and everyone drinks again more carefully than they did before. Streets bloom from foundations and negotiate with rain the way diplomats share sweet cakes before talking hard truths. Curbs tilt just enough to shepherd water toward brick-lined drains. Thresholds rise a careful thumb's height so houses stay clean without tripping sleepy feet. Pavements near crossroads wear a tougher face. Fired slabs set flatter than wisdom teeth. When carts roll through, the city hums along its baked arteries, and the houses lift their eyebrows as if to say, yes, this is what we were made for. Foundations mind the temper of the soil, stepping out wide where the ground remembers to be soft. Narrowing as height increases so weight behaves like a polite guest. Builders tamp each layer of fill the way you would soothe an anxious goat. Calm voice, steady pressure, no sudden promises. Vertical drains hide within walls to escort any stray seepage down to gravel beds that accept such gifts without comment. A house raised on this patience sleeps through storms like a child exhausted from happy play. Thresholds do more than carry the foot story from outside to in. Grooves cut across some sills divert the muddy rush of monsoon feet into a small side channel, turning chaos into a respectful trickle. Stone sockets receive wooden posts that once held doors thick enough to bargain with a winter wind. The sockets still cradle their memories, polished by the comings and goings of years that had no number for themselves. A faint smear of pigment suggests someone painted their doorway a brave color just because they could. Heat, when it remembers its old ambition, cannot bully rooms built with thoughtful bricks. Thick walls store the sun in their bellies by day and release it later with a generosity that allows sleep to arrive on time. High vents invite hot air to reconsider its life choices and leave. Sleeping platforms along the inner wall cool faster than the floor, and the night rewards nappers with dreams that smell faintly of baked earth and cumin. Pride in brickwork goes beyond walls that stand straight. Songs tease apprentices who forget to wet the mortar. Jokes praise the mason whose corners meet like cousins reunited at a harvest feast. Some families keep a perfect brick on a shelf, the way others keep a story, to remind children that strength fits in the hand as easily as a sweet. A grandmother taps that brick with a spoon before meals. A tiny ceremony that says, eat, build, be kind. Games grow in the margins of labor. Children collect misfired pieces, those that cracked or swallowed a bubble, and stack them into forts that try very hard to look like the grown-up city they imitate. Pebbles become people. A shard is a boat. A long chip of fired clay is a royal road for ants. Later those same children carry real bricks, and the forts they built with laughter teach their backs where to place effort and their minds where to place patience. Comparisons travel easily and settle in the minds of traders and builders alike. Some say the people upriver prefer a mixture with less lime and more sand. Others swear by clay dug from a bend that smells of mango roots. Stories float of distant cities where bricks vary like personalities and walls wobble like unimportant promises. Whether a single council set the standard here or guilds agreed out of old habit remains uncertain. Historians are still debating this question, and the walls keep their own counsel. Offerings precede the great firings with a simplicity that embarrasses pomp. A pinch of grain, a smear of oil, a breath of sweet smoke. Across the wide intersection where two brick lanes meet, stalls bloom like sudden gardens, awnings of woven reed casting zebra stripes over the ground, perfumes of sesame oil, toasted barley cakes, and river fish drying on frames mingle with fresher notes of wet clay and crushed leaves. A hum rises, a braided sound of bargaining, laughter, and the gentle clack of standardized weights tapping bronze pans. As you step into the current of bodies, the market's pulse folds you in, and the city reveals the side of itself that eats, trades, dresses, repairs, and dreams in public. Between two shade poles, a merchant spreads a cloth and arrays tiny chert cubes in a tidy binary progression. 1, 2, 4, 8. Then small companions that halve and refine. Balance beam scales dangle from a hook shaped like a crescent. Pans kiss each other level when deal and promise align. Your palm learns the language of heft. A single bead's price becomes a choreography of stones and nods. Trust here doesn't travel as sermon. It travels as a handful of calibrations every trader recognizes by touch alone. Under an awning dyed the color of pomegranate skin, a woman in shell bangles shakes a pouch of clay ceilings and lets them clatter softly into a bowl. Each bears the raised image of a bull, a fish, or that enigmatic single-horned creature whose profile has launched more questions than answers. She strings ceilings onto reed cord as receipts, the way others tally with pebbles, and you realize the market keeps its memory in fired clay as much as in human recollection. Ownership is not a shout but a mark pressed into wet earth and allowed to harden. Beyond the spice cellars, a bead maker sits cross-legged behind trays that sparkle, agate, jasper, faience and blue as sudden as sky between clouds. He turns a drill of hard chert that bites a neat hole through carnelian, the tool spinning between palms with the easy patience of someone who has negotiated with stubborn stone since childhood. The whir is barely audible, yet your fingertips vibrate in sympathy, as if the song of the tool tunes the nerves in your hand. Inside a shallow pit lined with ash, another craftsperson roasts carnelian in a clay crucible, heating it until the brownish stone flushes deep orange red. Cracks open like fine spiderwebs when temperature misbehaves, so she feeds the kiln with dung patties at a steady rhythm to keep the heat honest. A slurry of plant ash and mineral salts paints a resist pattern on certain beads. After firing, white designs emerge like ghost vines climbing the red, a technique so precise it still unsettles newcomers. Historians are still debating this question of whether every etched pattern signals clan, workshop, or something more sacred. Over by the lane where sun squeezes in a narrow beam, shell bangle makers shape bracelets from conch imported from distant coasts. A blank disc is cut, the center removed, and then the ring is polished until it gleams the way moonlight does on quiet water. Brides here expect a perfect snugness measured not merely by wrist size, but by a custom that pairs the bangle's ring width with a lucky number whispered during the fitting. It is a small, sweet superstition, and you feel the city's affection for such precise tenderness. Behind a flutter of cotton, textile sellers weigh folded cloth that smells faintly of river and dye. Indigo whispers midnight into the weft. Madder teases the warp with coppery warmth. Turmeric blazes yellow like a noon that refuses to end. Patterns arise from block prints carved into wood, pressed with a confidence that leaves tiny flecks of occurrence. Imperfections that make the cloth feel more alive than a sermon about perfection ever could. When you brush the fabric, the threads per contentment in your palm. Near a cluster of clay braziers, food vendors fry lentil cakes that hiss but never gossip. Onion greens join late and flirt with your appetite. Bowls of barley porridge wait beside a jar of palm jaggery, whose sweetness answers the question of why the line here is longer than at the fish stall. Sesame oil glows in a shallow dish like trapped afternoon. A seller spoons a glint of it over flatbread with a flourish practiced enough to be generous and fast enough to be affordable. A sip of cumin water clears the dust from your throat and leaves a trail of coolness to follow. Elsewhere along the lane, fish hang in rows, tails pointing like tiny flags toward the river they left at dawn. Salt stiffens their shine. Smoke drifts in ribbons from a clay dome where fillets inherit a flavor you will later dream about. A child counts anchovies under his breath, loses track, giggles and starts again, while his grandfather ties bundles with a sailor's knot that does not come undone in rain. The market moves on tiny rituals like these, tasks that look simple until you try them. Past the rows of food and fragrance, a coppersmith's booth rings with brisk, cheerful blows. Hammer faces kiss a sheet into a bowl whose curve you can almost drink from before it's finished. Ingots arrive wrapped in straw. Bellows pulse like the lungs of a sleeping beast. A smear of soot speaks the private arithmetic of heat. The smith examines a new axe head, tests its edge against a strip of palm fiber, and nods. A quiet ceremony that blesses the tool's future with wood and harvest rather than war. Toward a side alcove marked by a carved ringstone, merchants gather to weigh bulk goods. Chert weights click in series, and a clerk with an oiled plume writes tallies in clay not with letters you read but with marks that mean something precise to those who trained for the task. The binary progression makes counting efficient. Small stones stack into larger meanings with a satisfying logic that could lull anyone who loves fairness into a smile. One pan settles, the other rises, and the deal enters the day's memory. Along the spice quarter, music slips in like a polite guest who nevertheless makes conversation livelier. A reed flute threads between stalls. A frame drum keeps the lane's walking beat. Anklet bells sow metallic punctuation in the dust. Sellers tune their calls to that rhythm. Beads presented on the downbeat, cloth fluttered on the up, oil poured in a syllable the drum approves. You may not be a dancer, but your feet learn the market's choreography in 10 steps. Underfoot, baked brick paving changes texture at the busiest crossways. Smoother faces near corners save sandal straps, while rougher stretches keep eager feet from showing off and sliding. Someone sprinkles water from a jar to persuade dust to behave. Another sweeps with a palm frond broom that has seen more lanes than a messenger. Patterns and footprints tell stories without anyone needing to brag. Heavy toes where sacks were lifted, lighter heels where children chased one another and forgot to grow up for 10 blissful heartbeats. Within a ring of traders leaning on their carts, caravan leaders tell of passes over folded hills and long glimmers of desert where stars audition as guides. Donkeys wear bells tuned just shy of annoyance so predators think twice and friends think thrice before wandering off. Copper traveled with them from cliffs that sweat metal. Lapis sometimes sneaks in from mountains where blue is born from rock and thunder. Your ears fill with far roads and the sweet domesticity of arrival. Abroad on the edges of the known water, sailors swap rumors of Dillman's harbors and Megan's coves, of places that collect ships the way a storyteller collects endings. A quiet figure with a beard threaded in shell speaks a few words in a language that tilts around your tongue. Maluha. He calls this valley's name when the wind listens closely. Trading partners carry small gifts to soften first offers. A painted box for someone's child, a slice of dry date that pretends to be the whole orchard. The market is as much theater as ledger. Scholars in later ages will argue whether every mention of Maluha in distant lists means this land or a poet's idea of it. Clay tablets named with places can be shy about directions and distances, and echoes sometimes masquerade as maps. Historians are still debating this question, and while the debate simmers, the market keeps cooking, unconcerned with how future mouths will describe its flavor, as long as tonight's supper is fairly won. Downstream of the bustling stalls, a brick-lined basin accepts shallow draft boats that slip in at a sign from the current. The place functions like a throat, taking in goods, swallowing them into storerooms, and speaking them back onto carts. Some call this an honest dockyard, engineered for rise and fall. Others suggest it once stored water for dry months or taught priests the geometry of blessings. Historians are still debating this question, and you feel each proposal stretch and settle like ropes under tension. Oddly delightful items lurk between serious wares. Terracotta animal figurines, each with a tiny hole that turns them into whistles when you blow gently. Cosmetic palettes shaped like leaves that fold into themselves. And bronze-ear scoops attached to miniature tweezers, delicate tools that make you smile at how neatness joins dignity in a single gesture. A vendor displays a mirror of polished copper that catches your face and exaggerates your curiosity into a little blush you pretend is just the sun. Some stalls double as tiny sanctuaries where coin and blessing exchange glances before deals proceed. A clay lamp burns on a ledge. A bowl holds fragrant resin, its thread of smoke curling up like a scribe's flourish. Traders touch the flame's warmth with 2 fingers and then their forehead. At the threshold of a narrow lane, a doorway opens onto a courtyard that holds the morning like a clean bowl. Sunlight settles on plastered walls. A pot hangs from a simple peg. The smell of last night's ash lingers in the air. Not smoky. More like a story that has decided to stay. A sweep of reed broom marks the ground with gentle arcs, and sparrows steal crumbs with the audacity only sparrows manage. Inside this walled square, a house chooses its tempo. Neither hurried nor lazy, just practiced. While you slip your sandals aside and step onto the cool clay floor, within arm's reach of the entrance, a raised hearth waits, its edges smoothed by years of careful hands. A clay tripod balances a bronze pot. Ember glow from tucked coals promises breakfast without drama. Lentils soften with a sound like rain beginning, and barley grits thicken into porridge that will later remember to welcome jaggery. A child fans the fire with a palm leaf, exaggerating importance, while an older aunt grins and pretends not to notice the ash streak drawn proudly across a cheek. Across the courtyard, storage jars stand shoulder to shoulder, their bellies painted with simple bands and dots that could be decoration or bookkeeping depending on who you ask. Broad mouths accept scoops of millet and barley. Narrow necks keep sesame oil safe from dust and greedy ants. Rope seals once pressed with a familiar animal mark. Bull for this household, fish for the neighbor. Still show faint scars where knots bit into clay. Nothing here shouts ownership. It merely hums it under its breath. Under the shade of a stretched cloth, a low platform serves as dining table, bench, and community stage depending on the hour. Flatbreads rise and fall like little moons, lifted from the griddle by fingers that know heat well enough to be respectful without being fearful. Pickled mango slices wink from a glazed bowl, their tartness the polite slap that wakes your tongue. Water poured from a narrow-spouted jar flows in a tidy arc, the kind that says someone measured this pour 1,000 times and found the perfect angle. Behind a thin wall, a small room promises coolness even in noon's fiercest posture. Plastered surfaces carry a faint sheen. Some swear crushed shell mixed into the mud makes the light behave differently, softer, friendlier. Sleeping platforms along the far side hold woven mats, pillows stuffed with flowering reed, and a comfort that arrives precisely when your shoulders surrender their seriousness. The air smells of cumin 1 hour, of wet clay the next, depending on which pot has most recently made the house a little gladder. Near the corner where sunlight loses interest, a stair of stout bricks climbs to a roof that doubles as night parlor and laundry yard. Lines of cotton stretch like quiet music between parapets. A wooden paddle beats cloth against a stone, with rhythm that both cleans and comforts. When evening visits, this roof receives bowls, stories, and the slow drift of constellations across the lane's thin slice of sky. Some households spill a ribbon of water along the parapet's base so the night breeze remembers to be kind. At the far edge of the courtyard, a bathing platform waits. 2 steps up, a smooth floor, a jar set shoulder-high where a dipper rests like a promise. Water poured over skin rushes into a brick-lined drain that carries it toward the lane's channel, partnering housekeeping with civics in a friendship too steady to mention. A small recess holds scented ash and oil. Cleanliness practices here are not occasional theater but daily grammar. The city's drains live because households like this teach them how. From the doorway, voices drift in and out. Neighbors borrowing a pinch of spice, returning a jar, trading news about fields and fish. Work moves through the rooms in loops rather than lines. Grind, knead, stir, sweep, stitch, mend, repeat. Tools appear and vanish with the elegance of well-rehearsed actors. A bone needle glides, a spindle whirl purrs, a grinding stone sings, and you realize a house can be an orchestra when everyone plays for the same song. Beyond the hearth, a low table hosts board games scratched into clay. Grids and tracks whose rules children learn so young they forget they ever learned them. Terracotta grooved pieces slide with satisfying weight. Carved shell counters click like polite applause. Dice with tiny puncture dots tumble across a mat and decide that fortune approves today's plan. Whether these games mimic trade routes, initiate counting, or simply pass time with style, historians are still debating this question, and the room accepts all answers cheerfully. Beside a window slit barely wider than a hand, a shelf holds small figurines. Cattle with exaggerated humps, women with elaborate hair, birds whose beaks look ready to scold. Some look ceremonial, some like toys, and a few like inside jokes. A grandmother insists the bird figure keeps mice away. A child insists it can actually whistle. A potter insists he added the beak because it made the clay smile while it dried. Belief and play share the shelf without competitive ambitions. Across the yard, a loom waits with quiet patience, its warp taut and promising. Threads carry indigo and madder in bands that alternate like breath. In, out, in. Cloth grows under steady hands, a narrow field of color that folds later into a wrap, a sling, or a curtain that softens a doorway without making it shy. Textile skills run in families like eye color. No one hoards the trick of a tight selvage because generosity strengthens everything it touches. In the alcove where the wall meets the day at a graceful angle, a small shrine keeps company with a clay lamp. A palm-sized stone receives a smear of oil and a few grains pressed gently into it. More a thank you note than a petition. The household acknowledges powers older than recipes and younger than the river's oldest song. Candles do not flail. Flames keep their edges tidy. Reverence here opens and closes with the economy of someone who has breakfast to cook and children to herd. Across noon, the house learns to be quiet on purpose. Doors stay ajar for cross breezes. Mats relocate into shade. A clay water pot wrapped in damp cloth sweats with effort and succeeds in making itself deliciously cold. Siesta is not laziness but calibration. Even cats measure nap angles with professional pride, and you find yourself matching your breath to their soft, smug rhythm. Toward mid-afternoon, the grindstone returns to center stage, its broad face ready for pulses and grains. A handstone rides its surface in slow ovals, coaxing flour that smells like field and sunlight. Sesame seeds add a nutty murmur. Chickpeas promise a heartier loaf. Coriander seeds crash the party and are forgiven because flavor is family here. The resulting dough warms under palms, accepts a splash of oil, and relaxes into a pliant mood. By the northern wall, a closet of sorts, a recess with a tidy ledge, holds tools that skew toward repair. Needle set, spare twine, a copper awl, a bundle of spare thatch for patching leaks. Waiting beside them, a clay jar hides extra lamp wicks and a coil of reed rope. Preparedness wears no cape but does prevent melodrama. When a door squeaks, a dab of oil convinces it that silence is both dignified and fashionable. Outside the house, goats complain conversationally while zebu cattle flick flies with that particular elegance of animals who believe they invented patience. A child passes with a basket of herbs and a grin large enough to be useful in and of itself. Manure paddies dry and tidy rose against the sun-warm outer wall. Fuel waits humbly to become heat. The smell, surprisingly soft, says, "I am work transformed into warmth," and the kitchen agrees. Past the grindstone, the spindle whirl resumes its spin, its small weight turning a fluff of cotton into thread with nothing more than gravity and habit. Fingers draft fiber from a bowed mass that smells faintly of field. The spindle's tip points toward earth, and twist climbs like a vine. Yarn collects on the shaft. Songs collect in your head. This is the kind of labor that teaches time how to sit politely. Into the evening, the hearth claims attention again. Lentils redden under turmeric's persuasion. Onions surrender their skepticism and become sweet. A last-minute handful of fenugreek decides the meal's personality. Bread slaps the griddle in rounds that puff briefly like proud cheeks before relaxing into soft obedience. Food passes from pot to palm leaf plate to mouth in a choreography right-sized for the room. A dance that says hunger never had a chance today. Between bites, stories travel. Someone retells the time a clay jar exploded in the kiln because a ghost snuck into the slip. Someone counters with the tale of the goat, who learned to open a latch and was bribed into forgetting. Laughter finds the corners, sweeps the ceiling, and slips out the window to tease the lane. In houses like this, humor holds the roof up as reliably as beams do. Along the back wall, a child's chalk lines measure height against the season. Ticks march upward. Dates exist only as festivals, but the marks remember the months by rain and fire. A new line joins the others, drawn with ceremony and exactly the right amount of teasing. Success tastes like a fig shared equally between siblings and the last bite offered, without prompting. Across a low workbench scored with knife marks, a square of pale stone waits in the palm of your hand, smoother than it has any right to be. Steatite, soft enough to invite a blade, stubborn enough to hold a memory, has been chosen for this task since before anyone in this lane remembers. The stone's quiet face will soon host a small stage where animals stride and signs whisper, and every stroke you make must think like both artist and accountant. Between shallow trays of powdered abrasives, a carver selects a sliver of chert and begins the slow choreography of incision. Fine lines bite into the surface. A horn curving with disciplined elegance, a jaw that hints at breath, a back as calm as a well-taught river. Above the animal's spine, tiny signs assemble short, crisp, and maddeningly sure of themselves. 5 or 6 is usual. More feels boastful, fewer feels coy. Each sign carries rules about where it may stand and who it prefers for neighbors, the kind of grammar that refuses to brag in public yet organizes everything backstage. Clay impressions crowd a nearby basket, each a negative world where the lines swell into ridges. Jars once wore these ceilings like polite locks. Sacks surrendered to their authority without sulking. A knot passes, a cord tightens. The wet clay receives a push from the seal's boss, and the impression fixes identity with the finality of a signature that never dies. Merchants sleep easier when their marks guard the mouths of containers. Thieves frown at the thought of breaking an image everyone knows. Deep into the afternoon, polishing begins with a paste of fine grit and oil. The animal on the stone acquires a sheen that persuades even dust to admire it. Many seals carry the so-called unicorn, one horn sweeping forward from a long skull that scholars alternately bless as fantasy, composite, or misunderstood antelope. Historians are still debating this question, and the creature continues striding across centuries with the confidence of someone who never reads reviews. Elsewhere in the workshop, a boy drills a neat perforation through the seal's boss using a bow drill that purrs like a satisfied cat. The hole is not decoration. It promises practical friendship with a leather thong or dyed cord, so the seal can ride at the owner's wrist or hang from a belt. If lost, it is not lost for long. Neighbors know each other's beasts and signs as surely as they know each other's laughter. A bull's heavy neck speaks one household. A fish with turned tail hints another. A tiger that seems to smirk belongs to someone who earned the right. Scribes, if that is the right word for artisans whose alphabet declines to announce itself as an alphabet, arrive to advise on the placement of signs. Right to left suits most lines, the sequence beginning near the boss and marching toward the creature's nose. Some signs behave like dignitaries, insisting on first position. Others thrive in the middle. A few prefer to wave from the back like beloved ants at a festival. Whether these signs encode a full spoken language or a condensed ritual catalog remains an argument as lively as the market. Historians are still debating this question. Under a slant of light, the sequence reads like rain, short, precise, and oddly musical. One sign resembles a fish, another is a jar with a narrow neck. A comb-like shape sits beside something like a ladder. A double bowl argues politely with a three-pronged leaf. Statistical minds in future centuries will notice patterns in their companionships and distances. But tonight you merely sense that the order is not accidental. The stone seems to nod when you think this, which is either superstition or consent. Next, the steatite squares line up for their ordeal by fire. Alkali wash coats the carved face. A thin glaze concocted from plant ash and secret habit. Into the kiln they go, where heat persuades the surface to harden and pale from gray to chalky white. Fired steatite holds detail with a stubborn grace. The glaze brightens the lines so impressions smudge less and praise more. When the kiln door opens, a breath escapes the room. The kind released when careful work survives a danger everyone politely pretended not to notice. Beyond the workshop, the seal's real life begins in storerooms and thresholds. A merchant ties a reed cord around the neck of a jar, presses a clay wafer over the knot, and introduces the seal with a firm, friendly push. The animal and its little procession of signs appear in miniature relief, neat as a proverb. Later, if someone claims the jar has not been tampered with, all eyes travel to the intact impression and sigh with relief. Trust here is clay that has already made up its mind. Along the wall, a small chest holds copper tablets stamped with animals and signs. A cousin technology that travels flat and speaks in a voice some think of as tokens, others as receipts. They fit the palm like opinions. Satisfying, portable, persuasive. In a pinch, a tablet acts as a promise one can hand across a table without borrowing a scribe or a witness with excellent memory. Whether these copper pieces represent obligations, tallies, or ritual acts with economic perfume attached, historians are still debating this question. Neighbors enjoy decoding without quite being able to. When the fish sign appears alongside a jar, gossip says the message concerns oil, though a stubborn uncle insists it means star, because fishermen read the night as if it were a river. Children repeat both interpretations with the confidence of people who have not yet been punished by nuance. You smile at the notion that language can be delicious even before it becomes obedient. Across the city, a foreman carries his seal like a quiet drumbeat. At the granary, he signs for a stack of baskets that wish they were a hill. At the quay, he marks a shipment of carnelian that has seen more coastlines than most people see sunsets. Each impression seeds responsibility where it lands. If a jar later proves light or a basket develops opinions about vermin, the seal's image leads investigators back to conversations with real consequences and, occasionally, a shared joke that tightens knots better than fear does. Inside the household shrine of a trader, a niche holds the seal wrapped in dyed cloth when it sleeps. An oil lamp keeps it company the way an old friend keeps silence without offense. Whether this is reverence or prudence depends on whether you ask the grandmother, who respects tools that bind people to their word, or the granddaughter, who admires the unicorn and wants it to adopt her. Either way, the seal acquires the patina of touch that all beloved objects eventually wear. Beyond the plane of warehouses, seals travel with caravans and boats like passports that fit better in a mouth than in a pocket. Interpreters up and down the river learn to recognize the animals and the cluster of signs that typically follow them, even if they cannot pronounce the names that inspired them. In distant ports, foreign scribes sketch the unicorn into their ledgers with affectionate bewilderment. A few seals wander so far that they return only as stories told by sailors with a weakness for midnight. Near the bead quarter, a craftsman mends a broken boss with a delicate rivet and a prayer worked into resin. The owner cannot imagine life without this physical shorthand. To replace it entirely would be like changing a face. Seals, after all, are more than tools. They are biographies folded into a square. Profession, lineage, guild, and a hint of personal bravado. Some even hide a microsign tucked inside the animal's eye or between its hooves, a flourish invisible to anyone not instructed to look. Whether these secret touches are security measures or vanity, historians are still debating this question. Under an awning perfumed with cardamom, two traders stage a transaction so tidy your heart applauds. Weight stones do their dance, the balance size level, and then the sealing ritual completes the duet. As the clay puck bears the unicorn forward into permanence, both parties exchange a small nod that outlives the sale. It is not a bow to the past but a handshake with tomorrow. When the jar arrives, this very image will be waiting to be recognized, and recognition is a kind of love. Behind a curtained doorway, a woman uses a seal as a charm during a household ceremony, pressing its animal into a lump of damp clay and tucking the token above the threshold. Whether everyone agrees on this practice depends on which neighbors you invite to dinner. Some call it practical magic, others call it elegant bookkeeping that doubles as comfort. In a city that prefers civility to thunder, no one feels compelled to argue. The threshold appreciates the attention and remembers to be lucky. Across a shelf of curiosities, cylinder seals from foreign lands sit beside the local squares like cousins who dress differently to the same festival. Our square seals press once and speak immediately. There's roll and recite a longer sentence. Someone suggests that rolling a unicorn would give it 4 legs on each side and therefore embarrass it. Laughter convinces even the most earnest guest to abandon the experiment. Local taste remains loyal to what works quickly in a busy storeroom. Ritual imagery occupies one corner of the workshop. Not gods that shout, but objects that hint. Before many unicorns stands a peculiar stand or filter, sometimes read as incense burner, sometimes as a grain measure or libation device. The creature dawn settles into the courtyard with the softness of sifted flour, pale light catching on lime-plastered walls until they glow like fresh shells. Low steps rise toward a square platform set beneath the spreading arms of a fig tree, and a clay lamp trembles with the last blue breath of night. Here, you pause at the edge of swept earth and feel the hush that old places teach, the kind that is not silence so much as organized listening. A reed mat lies ready beside a shallow bowl, and in that waiting lies the promise of a morning shaped by careful hands rather than by hurry. Stone underfoot keeps its cool as though it remembers the river long after the buckets have gone. Ringstones, those donut-like circles with a surprisingly elegant waist, frame the base of the sacred tree and channel the trickle from a libation bowl toward a brick-lined pocket where thirsty roots accept gifts without complaint. Circumambulation begins at a pace anyone's heartbeat can understand. 3 turns to greet, 5 turns to ask, 7 turns to thank. The air smells of damp leaves, resin, and the faint sweetness of yesterday's smoke. Between doorways along the lane, families arrive with baskets barely larger than palms. Millet in neat cones, barley pinched into little hills, sesame bundled like black rain. Each grain knows its task in the choreography. A pinch crosses the flame, a pinch drops to the foot of the tree, a pinch rides the breeze as snack and sermon for sparrows. Hands pass over heads in modest arcs. No grand gestures, only the practical tenderness of people who believe good order invites good fortune. Around the outer edge of the platform, hearth ash from many houses rests in tidy mounds, a domestic genealogy written in gray. A finger draws a simple spiral through one mound while an elder murmurs a blessing whose words wear the smoothness of long practice. Ash and grain mix in the shallow groove so that fire, hunger, and hope agree to share one sentence. When you lean forward to add your own small mark, the roughness catches your skin and persuades you that the sacred is not an escape from work, but the way work learns to be gentle. Above the lintel that guards the courtyard's inner chamber, a string of terracotta plaques clinks softly in the breeze. Each carries a pressed symbol. A fish here, a bull there, a bird turning its head as if listening, and together they operate like a family of very polite bells. Seal impressions tucked into clay pockets keep company with the plaques, not as displays of wealth but as shorthand for the household's promises. We store grain, we sell beads, we mend boats. The threshold collects these hints and turns them into a smile only a house can wear. Beneath the tree, a copper bowl sits on a low stand whose legs flare like stylized reeds. Water poured into it finds a perforation at the center and falls in a narrow thread into a catch basin, the stream singing just enough to count as a voice. You wet your fingers and touch brow, throat, and heart. Coolness taught to do geography with kindness. Scholars far away might argue about the purpose of the famous brick bath in a city upriver, but the logic here is obvious. Clean skin, clean speech, clean bargains. Historians are still debating this question about what larger rituals such waterworks once served. Within the shade, a square of compacted earth bears faint concentric circles traced by bare feet during many seasons of walking prayer. The path is neither strict nor slack. It leans toward modesty and invites the sort of attention that has no room for vanity. At each corner of the courtyard, small trays with powdered pigments wait. Vermilion that refuses to whisper, turmeric bright as noon, charcoal like stored night. A dot at the center of the brow, a line at the throat, and the day remembers to carry itself as if balance were contagious. Outside the sanctuary space proper, a pair of frame drums and a reed flute wait on a cloth as plain as the sky when the monsoon goes shy. Musicians slip in without claiming attention and let rhythm ask for room. The beat is not a march or a boast. It is closer to walking, to the labor of hands and the tilt of water from jar to bowl. When the flute joins, the courtyard seems to inhale, notes curling around pillars, slipping between leaves, and settling in the shadow of the lamp like friendly animals. Along the north wall, pale pigment sketches launch a procession of animals so lightly you might miss them at a careless glance. A bull whose shoulders remember mountains, a fish whose belly knows the calendar of the river, a bird caught mid-gossip with a branch. It is not painting to overwhelm but to nod toward neighbors. Shell lime in the plaster catches every stroke and multiplies the light, so that simple outlines glimmer without swagger. You follow the curve of a horn with the same small satisfaction you felt watching a potter's thumb smoothing a rim. Across the courtyard's center, a line of low brick pedestals forms a row of shallow recesses, each blackened by past fires and discreetly cleaned. Some households call them offering hearths. Others use them to warm perfumed oil for a celebration, claim them for solemn vows, or time the telling of important stories to the length of a smoldering twig. Excavations in other towns speak of fire altars set in rows, 7 or more at a time, a ceremonial geometry that insists heat can be taught good manners. Whether every row belonged to worship or some to administrative ceremony, historians are still debating this question. Beyond the boundary where shade thins and sunlight rehearses its authority, a path leads toward a public square with a platform anyone may mount if their words can keep their balance. On market days, dispute settlers sit there like anchors in the stream. On festival mornings, children stomp powder into floral patterns that last until the smallest goat votes otherwise. Pilgrims arriving from a day's walk rinse at the well, untie dust from ankles, and present sweets to the courtyard steward, a role less grand than priest and more beloved than gatekeeper. Sometimes the sacred arrives with hooves. A garlanded bull ambles into the lane at planting time, forehead brushed with turmeric, horns tipped in a color the river does not make on its own. He receives grain from many palms, not because he demands tribute but because the city believes in saying please to the animals that carry it through all 4 seasons of patience. When he leaves, the clop of his feet recedes like a drum someone set gently back on the mat. Elsewhere in the settlement, small shrines cluster near workshops, each with its own tone. Potters favor a ledge that catches afternoon light and a bowl of water for thirsty clay. Beadmakers tuck a figurine near the drill stand and ask stubborn stones to try kindness before force. Coppersmiths smear the first gleam of a fresh polish onto a brick, as if teaching shine where to live. You wander between these corners and feel how work and reverence weave the same fabric, warp steady, weft bright. Here, an intriguing square seal rests beside the lamp, its animal posed with deliberate calm and its script arranged like a polite argument. Some call the horned-seated figure a master of beasts, others a meditating hunter, a few a memory of a story no one writes anymore. The posture suggests focus, the horns suggest authority, the surrounding animals suggest agreement. Whether this is a deity, a guild emblem, or something else entirely, historians are still debating this question. You tilt the seal and watch the horn catch light like a crescent of quiet. Under a canopy corner where shadows collect, a set of perforated jars sits perched on tripods above smoldering twigs. Aromatic leaves dance inside, their smoke traveling through the holes like advice you can smell. Strainers? Incense burners? Beekeepers' friends? Uses multiply by context and by the cheekiness of local inventors. Today, the jars carry fragrance toward the doorway and persuade mosquitoes to postpone dinner. Tomorrow, they may clarify butter by letting steam sigh through small punctures. Nearby, a well head rises with brickwork so precise that your hands want to applaud. Ringstones step downward in a narrowing spiral, each one rubbed to a softness earned by many palms. Ablutions here are not grand or public. They are the tidy good manners of a community that trusts water to keep tempers cool and skin honest. Splash the face, rinse the mouth, tip a little into the basin for the tree, and the courtyard recognizes that cleanliness is not separate from sacredness but its reliable first sentence. After the morning circuit, the platform becomes a school in disguised clothing. Children recite simple poems about grain and rain, tracing letters on dust whose memory does not mind being erased for next hour's lesson. A teacher draws squares and circles with a stick. Little hands place pebbles at corners and along arcs, learning measure with delight before they learn it with obligation. When someone misses a count, the courtyard pretends not to notice. When someone invents a clever shortcut, the fig tree looks pleased. Inside the small chamber beyond the lintel, shelves carved into the wall cradle figurines of clay and stone. Women with generous hips and hair stacked like an ambitious tower, animals and postures that feel more like verbs than nouns, and a few objects no one can agree to name with confidence. Curators in other places will someday call certain pieces mother goddesses, with conviction that later generations will gently question. Historians are still debating this question, and the chamber delivers no verdict beyond warmth. Across the settlement, morning wakes with a soft clink of jars as households greet the day's first chore. Persuading water to be everywhere it is needed and nowhere it should not be. Lanes breathe out the night's coolness. Wells glitter like coins swallowed by the earth and now half spat back up, and the city stretches its brick shoulders as if preparing for choreography. Lamps fade, lids lift, and the first dipper's splash becomes a cue, an audible baton, sending women, children, and sleepy uncles into motion. The plan is not improvised. It is rehearsed daily, refined by seasons, and practical enough to pass an inspection conducted by the river itself. Beneath the courtyard's thread of shade, a ring well waits. Brick rings stacked in a perfect vertical poem, each course set a hair's breadth inward to resist collapse. Palm lines trace the cool arc, feeling grooves where cords have rubbed for years. A tactile diary of buckets risen and lowered. Water twinkles a story from deep time, iron-tinged and honest. A boy hums as he cranks the rope over a wooden roller polished to a silk the city could never afford with coin alone. When you lean in, the air smells faintly of minerals and the long patience of aquifers, a scent that convinces thirst to behave politely. Between house and lane, a narrow stone-lipped channel carries rinsings, bath water, and the occasional runaway lentil toward the street drains. The gradient is deliberate, a barely there slope that turns trickles into confidence without giving them permission to sprint. Bricks at the channel's edges are fired dark and dense to withstand soap, ash, and small dramas. Joints are struck neat so water finds no reason to gossip with walls. A small grating, lifted with the hook of a finger, lets you clear stray leaves before they decide to form a committee. Beyond the thresholds, the lanes host brick-covered drains broad enough to swallow a goat's ambition yet shy enough to discourage curiosity. Flat slabs bridge the runs at walking intervals, and every so often a removable capstone marks an inspection point. Workers know the route by memory the way a potter knows a kiln's moods. When a clog sulks, a rod goes in, a twist answers back, and the lane resumes its clear-sounding conversation with gravity. Odors stay modest, filtered by ash and occasional baskets of river reeds stuffed thoughtfully into soak pits. Under a slanted cover near the settlement's heart, a great tank rests, a rectangle of baked brick laid so precisely that water pretends it is glass. Steps descend on each side, wide enough for crowds and careful enough for ceremony. Their treads rubbed smooth by many seasons of sols. Lime plaster, burnished with crushed shell until it shines like a quiet moon, seals the basin against leaks. Some claim this is where guilds wash away quarrels. Others whisper the water knows the names of vows and keeps them safe. Whether it is civic bath, ritual font, or both at once, historians are still debating this question, and the surface keeps its own counsel. Inside a small workshop by the clay pits, pipe makers shape terracotta spouts that resemble bird beaks and flattened fish. Tubes cure in the shade before they learn to speak water. Collars flare to receive mortar. Sockets taper so joints nestle tight and resist the mischief of roots. A woman with wrists like rope turns a length of damp clay around a reed core. Spirals seem pressed smooth with a wetted wooden rib, creating a drainpipe light enough to carry and strong enough to earn its place in the ground. Fired pieces ring when tapped, a music that says, "I will last." Around the public well in the market square, ringstones brace the lip like a necklace laid flat. Rope grooves talk of decades. Bronze cups clink. Bored oxen exhale biographies. Two buckets work a duet, one rising as the other descends, married by a yoke that learned balance from rivers and seesaws. A clerk stands under the awning with a tally cord, knots sliding along like beads, as households take turns drawing what they claim and what they need. Everyone knows the etiquette. A dipper for thirst, a jar for home, a smile for the next in line. Sometimes the city improvises in the face of weather's eccentricities. Earthen embankments, tamped hard with clay, run like calm shoulders along the outer fields, catching the river's enthusiastic hug and converting it to a respectful handshake. Spill channels peel away at agreed points, guiding excess into holding ponds where silt learns to settle. After floodwaters behave, men and women scoop that silt back to starving patches of soil with baskets and easy jokes, paying a tax in sweat that returns as barley and sesame. In a neat irony, the flood that threatens also brings the seeds of next season's plenty. Elsewhere, a gardener squats beside a field ditch whose sides are lined with sun-baked tiles set on a gentle slant. Water ripples past his toes toward rows of millet, assisted by small checks made from bundled reeds. He lifts a tile at one gap and plugs it further with a clod of clay, trimming the flow like a musician trims a note in a phrase. Farther along, a small gate carved from hardwood answers to a peg and groove, letting him open or narrow the current in an instant. The ditch hums an amen each time an adjustment pleases it. Meanwhile, the kitchen wall's drain adopts a more private tone. Gray water threads through a pottery jar sunk on its side beneath the courtyard. The old jar cracked on duty but still loyal, filled with grated gravel and a handful of charcoal scavenged from the stove. The trick is to pour slowly, letting grease turn shy as water finds better company. Out the far side, a clean trickle slips into the lane drain, and no one scolds the cook for using yesterday's idea again today because yesterday's idea continues to be excellent. After a storm drapes the rooftops with a shining shawl, runoff gathers in rooftop channels edged with low parapets. Spouts shaped like open-mouthed pigeons spit into amphory. First flush diverters, a grand term for removable plugs, send dusty water to the garden until the roof remembers to be clean. When jars fill, lids bloom like water lilies, and a child in charge of timing announces with seriousness that the household has achieved just enough to be proud. The courtyard floor dries in a pattern that looks suspiciously like contentment. Toward the river mouth, a feeder canal takes a right-angle turn to flirt with a dune before finding its old steady self. Clay revetments shore the outer bend against the river's ambition to edit maps, while willow fascines, bundles tied tight and staked through, teach the bank to hold. A simple wooden sluice with a slide panel dismisses silt when it grows cheeky. Another slide bows to incoming tide, letting sweet water linger just long enough to be useful. Boats nod past the gates as if doffing caps to a clever steward doing an unglamorous job perfectly. Along the busiest avenue, drain covers multiply into an unbroken sidewalk. Their seams so precise that sandals never snag and cartwheels never protest. Every 10th slab hides an inspection pit with a brick lip and a loop of copper set in mortar, an invitation to maintenance crews armed with reed poles, rope, and the confidence of long practice. Twice a month, the city sings the cleaning song. Poles down, scrape scrape, haul, splash, while bystanders supply advice and snacks. Laughter helps sludge lose its dignity and therefore its power. Later the discussion drifts to the giant tank upriver that some call the Great Bath of Baths, a place of symmetrical stairs and water that holds secrets without turning gloomy. Was it for guild rites, seasonal ceremonies, public oaths, or all three at different hours? Did officials bind contracts with a shared dip, or did families celebrate rites of passage in lines that mirrored the city's grid? Historians are still debating this question, and your mind enjoys the exercise because the bricks do not seem offended by ambiguity. They glow either way. Today, a well repair begins with quiet ceremony and a rope that looks more courageous than it feels. The lining has slipped. The old bricks sigh in a language of small shifts. Workers lower a new terracotta ring, the rim thick, the inside scored for traction, coaxing it into place with padded levers and murmurs. A garland of marigolds greets the well when the job ends, not because water demands flowers, but because gratitude demands witnesses. A coin is not dropped. Coins are rare luxuries here, but a single bead finds the darkness, and the darkness accepts it with understated grace. Tonight the water carriers move through lanes like deliberate meteors, shouldering yokes that creak politely. Buckets shiver. Stars wink in surfaces. Household doors open in brief rectangles of lamplight. Gossip travels with liquid efficiency. Which field drank greedily, which neighbor's drain sang off-key, which jar lid refused to sit straight until it was threatened with becoming a plant pot. The city's social life runs on stories and shared tools as much as on sesame and barley. Finally, the engineering hides in plain sight, folding mathematics into habit. Drain slopes sit at that sweet compromise where speed outruns smell but not bricks. Well rings step inward just enough to make the column hold itself. Cover slabs span distances their makers measured not with rulers but with bodies that had learned what weight asks of matter. A child plays marbles at the edge of a sluice and idly discovers hydraulic head by watching who wins when two threads of atelier air smells of wet clay and singed chaff. A perfume that insists on work before breakfast has finished remembering its own warmth. Shadows of turning wheels ripple across the packed floor, and low songs settle into the rafters the way swallows do, arranging themselves in useful lines. A foreman with hands like patient bricks nods as you enter. The gesture contains welcome, instruction, and a small warning not to walk where the newborn pots are sleeping. In this room, time behaves politely. Hours stretch when skill needs them to and shorten when confidence earns the favor. Potter's palms begin the first lecture without words. Clay lifts from a basin with a sound like a frog leaving a pond. The lump lands, slumps, then rises under a wet thumb's persuasion. Water keeps secrets on the surface. Too much, the walls sigh. Too little, the rim sulks. So you learn to dip fingers with a miser's precision and a baker's generosity. The wheel spins, not fast, not slow, just enough to teach balance how to settle inside the wrist. Your breath follows that circle until anxiety falls out of step and decides to wait by the door. Clay remembers every kindness and records every insult. A smear of fine sand wakes it to strength. A whisper of straw persuades it not to crack when heat tells stories later. You wedge the lump against the board, pushing bubbles out like petty arguments, and then center it squarely so the wheel has nothing to tease. The first pull lifts a wall. Your knuckles guide a gentle climb. The pot discovers a throat. No speech yet, but the shape knows what sentence it will eventually want to say. Cool water lives here, hot stew lives here. Flowers consider living here if the day is extra kind. Circles gather on the damp boards like moons settling after rehearsal. Bowls, jars, spouted pitchers with lips trained to pour without sulking. Each bears a thumbprint low on the belly where you once steadied it against wobble. A paddle smooths, a rib refines, and the outside skin brightens as if it had learned a courtesan's trick from the inside of seashells. Handles arrive last, coaxed into loyalty where rim meets shoulder. A marriage fastened by slip that dryly pretends not to be romantic even though everyone knows it is. Smoke from the kiln writes rumor script against the rafters. Loading becomes a puzzle whose pieces breathe, each pot leaning on its neighbor's good manners so flames reach every curve. Larger vessels squat at the hearth end to shoulder the fiercest heat. Delicate cups ride higher, where warmth passes like a polite guest. Firing begins with the low groan of green wood catching, climbs through a crackle that encourages gossip, then settles into the steady mutter that means transformation without complaint. A single misjudged vent can turn a batch peevish. Hence every eye on the kiln speaks fluent color. Faience dazzles under a separate discipline. Powdered quartz kneaded with a small portion of clay becomes a pale paste that behaves like an ambitious cousin of stone. Beads and little bowls accept an alkaline glaze made from plant ash and mineral salts. Once fired, a blue arrives that could make a fisherman homesick at noon. The surface glows like rain has decided to stay. The edges shine enough to invite fingertips while discouraging them at the last moment. Whether faience here counts as true glaze or a class all its own, historians are still debating this question, and the window light refuses to pick sides. Kilnside whispers carry both chemistry and superstition. Feed the fire bravery, not vanity, says a potter, adding dung patties at measured breaths. A child sets an offering of sesame near the kiln door, a pinch more for luck than for heat, and rubs soot on the threshold in a sign that means, roughly, "Please be reasonable today." The master tilts the damper with a reed, watching smoke thin until it resembles a veil that knows when to reveal and when to suggest. When the door finally opens, the room exhales as one creature, and cooled vessels lift out with a weight that feels like answered questions. Beyond the clay quarter, metal calls with a brighter vocabulary. Blanks of copper lie stacked like slices of sunrise waiting for a pan. A crucible squats on charcoal that glows with old ambition. Tongs bite, bellows breathe, and the workshop smells of a thunderstorm that put on perfume. You help sort scrap and ingots, learning to listen for the shy ring that hints at purity. The foreman adds a pinch of arsenic for hardness in some batches, though others prefer tin when trade smiles. The exact recipes travel more by trust than by public proclamation. Metal groans, then relents, as it pours in a bright ribbon into open molds. Twin halves close like lips telling secrets. When they open, a new tool blinks. Chisel, awl, blade, or an adze whose angle knows what better than speech does. Hammering begins the second conversation, work hardening that teaches copper backbone without snarling. On the anvil, edges wake under a file's careful teeth. Water flicks onto hot metal not to punish but to encourage. You catch your face in the smoother pieces and laugh because the mirror keeps insisting your nose is bolder than you remember. Quenching in brine asks for timing more than muscle. Let the blade linger and it pouts. Dunk it early and it panics. Choose the right moment and the metal sighs into a curve of strength that makes you stupidly proud. Some smiths prefer oil for tools that must accept a little spring. Others choose clean water and a prayer that does not claim to boss molecules, only to introduce them politely. Whether alloying methods changed markedly over centuries or stayed remarkably stable despite fashion, historians are still debating this question, and the bellows seem amused by the debate. Anvils deliver language through wrists and elbows. Each hammer face, flat, rounded, or jealous for corners, writes a different dialect into coppa's skin. Rivet holes open with a kiss of tapered punch. Seams meet edge to edge. A smear of bitumen and crushed shell sneaks into boat fittings where water loves to eavesdrop. Scraps become hooks or needles. Nothing gets thrown away except stubbornness, and even that you keep a little for emergencies that demand it. Bellows inhale with goatskin lungs and exhale authority. Children fight to take turns because work that makes wind feels like pretending to be storm. Charcoal devours itself into clean heat. Ash learns not to complain. The smith tells jokes that always begin serious and end in laughter, because people who spend all day shaping perseverance cannot resist staging a tiny rebellion at dusk. Your hands ache in that good way that means a tool exists now that didn't when the sun started. Stone teaches a more patient grammar. In a lane shaded by reed mats, a cluster of chert cores sits like eggs in a nest, their surfaces flaked in deliberate scars that look messy only to eyes that mistake speed for wisdom. Pressure flaking lifts blades that are long for their width and astonishingly obedient. A quick pass on a sandstone slab trues the edge. A second pass announces readiness to the beadmaker or scribe. The rhythm becomes prayer without priests. Press, lift, slide, breathe. Carvers at a low bench coax bowls from limestone and hard green rocks that remember mountains in their stubbornness. Drilling begins with a reed or copper tube fed with abrasive grit. The slurry purrs as rings deepen, and the vessel emerges from the stone like a secret that had decided to be generous. A bowl thinned to translucence holds light as if it were broth. A lidded box receives a hinge carved from itself and behaves as though it always meant to be clever. Whether certain engraved motifs indicate specific clans or simply fashionable neighborhoods, historians are still debating this question, and the motifs enjoy the attention. Timber breathes resin and shade inside the carpenter's yard. Planks lie under stones to discourage warping. Beams rest on trestles like long animals considering nap. Copper saws with fine teeth move without haste. Adzes shave curls so smooth you want to keep them for pillows, though everyone warns this is a poor idea. Tenon slides into mortise with a thump that sounds like approval. Pegs of hardwood lock the marriage without the drama of metal nails. A straight edge made from an honorable branch travels from hand to hand, and you stroke it like a cat every time it does you a favor. Botrytes treat curves as if they were wayward cousins invited to dinner. Keel planks meet with seams that drink pitch the way stories drink listeners. Frames rise like ribs to cradle the hull's idea. Lashings of cord through drilled holes bind without bruising. The first launch is quiet ceremony. A smear of oil on the bow, a whisper from an elder who never volunteers what was said. Then water lifts the hull as if it were a promise kept. Upstream or down, the planks chatter less when they know a steady hand shaped them. Weavers spread warp threads across a frame that hums like a hive even before anyone sings. Weft shuttles ride between, the little fish that never stop, while fingers correct, persuade, and occasionally scold. Indigo, madder, turmeric, and soot become sentences in cloth. Patterns stroll or dance depending on the discipline of the wrist. You learn the trick of beating just enough to tighten, not enough to sulk. You learn that a selvage is a confession in public, and therefore you keep it neat for dignity's sake. A cloth that leaves the loom with a straight smile makes the day applaud. Dyers practice kitchen alchemy that would worry Tim. Midday heat loosens the plaster's faint lime scent as a steward opens the storehouse and tips a tray of clay ceilings into your hands. Thumbprints ridge the backs like quiet biographies. On the faces, a parade of tiny animals and even tinier signs steps forward in perfect relief. This is your first full armful of writing, if writing is what it is, tangible as bread, brief as a wink. Held close, the impressions smell of dust and rope, of jars that once sweated coolness in the shade. Held at arm's length, they smell like order, the way a well-swept lane smells like fairness. Whether the words were names, titles, blessings, commodities, or some cunning mixture of all four, the ceilings decline to gossip. You read what can be read, the direction of strokes, the discipline of spacing, the way one sign refuses to elbow another, and you feel the rest as a pressure behind the eyes. Tablets of copper rest in a shallow chest, stamped on one or both sides with the same compact calligraphy that enlivens the ceilings but behaves differently on metal. Raised relief reverses intaglio logic, and you turn each piece in the light the way a jeweler weighs fire. Some tablets show neat frames girdling the text. Others prefer a single line walking the length of the plate like a beam across a quiet stream. If clay is the voice a jar borrows to declare its loyalty, copper is a pocket-sized memory that outlives sacks and hands. Slip one into your belt and you carry obligation, permission, or proof without needing a scribe to stand beside you and nod. In arenas where words should travel farther than their speaker, these plates shine like practical magic. Scripts for most cities arrive as speeches. This one prefers whispers. Here are roughly a few hundred distinct signs. More if you count the little wings and tails that perch on main shapes like diacritics. Counts vary with the zeal of the counter. Some swear 400, others insist on a family closer to 6 or 7 when variants join the dinner. The signs love short company. For to 8 appear together so often that your eyes begin to expect brevity. A longer run feels like someone holding their breath for fun. Where other lands plant inscriptions on the sides of mountains, this city tucks them into palms, pockets, thresholds, and the unassuming faces of tools. Rightward strokes meet leftward flow, and the overall march moves from right to left, most of the time. Seal faces, remember, must be carved in mirror so their clay children read correctly. Your knife hand learns to think backward until backward becomes a species of forward. When lines stack, the upper line often begins at the right again, stubborn about its direction like a river that refuses to take a shortcut even when offered. A few charming rebels run the other way or bend like oxen turning a plow back and forth in Bustrafidon. Yet the majority keeps faith with the same orientation, as if the city believed consistency was a courtesy offered to the future. Caravans carry more than beads and copper. They carry the recognition of signs. Sailors upriver grin at the unicorn and nod at the fish. Porters inland greet the jar and comb as old acquaintances. When a new seal travels, it meets a network of eyes trained to understand at least who is speaking, if not everything spoken. That may be why images and script share one small room on every seal face. The animal greets strangers without translation, while the signs whisper specifics to those initiated enough to value them. You, who learn to love waits by their click, learn to love signs by their companionships, their habit of keeping certain friends and avoiding others as politely as gossip allows. Numbers hide in plain sight, the way they always do when their goal is to become a habit rather than a performance. Tall strokes gather in neat clusters. Small circles escort them. A pair of chevrons walks beside a jar sign as if counting its pores. Weight stones in their binary families. 1, 2, 4, 8. Teach your fingers a base that merchants trust even when tongues disagree. Next to a fish, a ladder-like sign might mean measure. Next to a grain ear, a row of dashes can begin to smell like inventory. None of this compels a single reading, yet your wrists memorize patterns even your mouth hesitates to name, and arithmetic becomes a flavor you recognize no matter who does the cooking. Baked clay tags, little pucks, slim bars and toothy rectangles accumulate in baskets near the granary office, each freshly impressed and still tender around the edges. A cord mark on the back tells which knot rested beneath. An animal on the front tells who took responsibility. Between them the signs sit like a panel of dignified elders. Snap a ceiling and the broken piece keeps testimony in two halves, each carrying the whole truth the way a split seed promises two plants. Passing one fragment along a route and leaving another at the origin feels like common sense disguised as charm. You pocket a shard and resist the urge to treat it like a talisman, though plainly that is half its secret. Ivory rods gleam like captured moonlight where a clerk has carved tiny lines and even tinier signs along one edge. Each notch earns a story. The number of bangles promised by the shell workers, the count of dyed bolts down at the reed shed, the sequence of households that drew water after the second bell of morning. Miniature script crouches between tally marks, so small you suspect the carver used a hair. Yes, an actual hair, wrapped around a sliver of chert as a brush to blacken the grooves. Whether these rods are master lists, mnemonic prompts, or ornaments that earned a second job when no one was looking, their practical beauty makes your fingers ache with the desire to understand every single word. Gypsum slabs mounted above a city gate whisper a larger ambition. Big letters, each nearly the size of both your hands stacked, inset into a wooden frame whose ghosts linger in the mountings. The pale rectangles catch twilight like a second horizon, repeating a message the gate wanted every passerby to hear even from the far side of the road. 10 signs? 8? The count depends on how generous you are with fragments, but the effect remains. A signboard that refuses to hide its confidence. Whether those signs named the city, honored a household, or announced a festival that refused to be missed, historians are still debating this question, and the empty mortises seem content to leave them to it. Fish recurs with delightful stubbornness. Not the animal itself swimming the river, though those hardly need a scribe, but the sign that looks like one. Head, tail, a central line for a spine, sometimes with decorative fins. Some readers with Dravidian thoughts in their heads murmur that fish and star share a word in certain tongues, and so perhaps the fish sign occasionally swims the night sky instead of the river. Others lift eyebrows and count occurrences beside jars, grains, and numbers, preferring trade to astronomy. You cradle the ambiguity the way you cradle a small lamp in wind. If the sign means both at different hours, then it behaves like life does with cheerful duplicity. Grammar nests inside brevity, a little palace made of positional habits. A handful of signs prefer the opening of a line and only rarely grace the end. Others relish closing statements and sulk if asked to lead. A few happily stand between, working as glue or breath. Attached marks, the extra flicks, dots, forks, Modify a sign's mood like spices modifying lentils. You test sequences with your tongue as if pronunciation might step out of hiding, but the city only allows you syntax. Who stands first, who never stands alone, which pairs are so married you feel scandalized whenever someone splits them. Sometimes the rules feel strict enough to be language. Sometimes they feel more like well-mannered brands. Lengths almost never tire the eye. For signs, 5, 6, rarely more. Compose most lines, each a compact chorus that ends before self-importance can clear its throat. The longest pieces run perhaps 24 signs if you squint, a marathon by local standards, found on metal plates or narrow slips where the carver clearly drank extra patience with breakfast. Brevity need not be poverty. It can be precision. Your favorite sequence today fits on your thumb and still feels complete. Tomorrow it will be another, because loyalty in reading is as changeable as the light on plaster. Workshops that carve seals keep curious secrets you don't notice until a master shows you. Guide dots, tinier than poppy seeds, pin the corners of a planned frame but never appear on the final impression. They are curriculum notes the teacher wipes off the slate before class arrives. Some carvers cut the animal and the border first, then let the signs walk in like important late guests. Others incise the line of script first to calm their nerves, then gift the unicorn a body that fits the space left. Every face is mirror writing, of course. Cast the impression into damp clay and the line reads the right way. If you forget this even once, the workshop will tease you until a second mistake creates the rumor of a deliberate style. Sealings from jars and bundles drift in from all over the quarter and pile in bowls labeled more by smell than by script. Sesame, oil, dried fish, millet. On one, the cord pattern has bitten so deep it almost obscures the signs. On another, the boss leaves a smudge where an owner's finger pressed too kindly. Breakage ranges from crisp to catastrophic, which is how you learn that some jars arrived without a scratch while others bounced like anecdotes. You start rescuing pretty fragments with partial animals, just a horn, just a tail. As harvest thrums across the floodplain like a well-practiced song. Sickles flashing sun into ribbons while chaff rises in little golden storms that pretend to be clouds. Teams move in a handsome stagger. Cut, bundle, pass. So the field seems to breathe as one animal, exhaling grain, inhaling laughter. From the path, you keep pace with a line of women who knot sheaves with wrist flicks learned from their grandmothers. Each twist a small signature that says this bundle will not sulk on the way to the threshing floor. Sweat tastes of dust and cumin. The air smells faintly of green sap, as if the season itself is still surprised it worked. An elder calls a timeout with the kind of authority only those with very few teeth can wield. Everyone pretends not to have been grateful for the pause. Threshing begins on a circular floor tamped hard enough to remember hooves. Bulls walk slow, blinders on, trampling bundles until grains snap free like shy guests bullied into dancing. Elsewhere, flails rise and fall with a drummer's precision, teaching straw to confess its treasure. The rhythm pulls your shoulders into cooperation before your pride can write a counterargument. When winnowing starts, baskets launch grain into a friendly wind that takes chaff away without charging extra. Kernels rain back, a private storm owned by every hand in the circle. A child giggles at the sound of grain hitting basket. The soft applause 1,000 small victories make when they agree to crowd together. Granaries hold their breath while sledge runners slide the sacks home. Brick platforms stand a respectful handspan above the jealous earth. Ventilation slots blink along the walls like narrow, patient eyes. Wooden bins sit in rows that make a clerk's heart feel seen. Plaster, burnished with crushed shell, seals seams against damp and against opportunistic gossip from mice. Thresholds wear bitumen along the base course for the same reason a fisherman oils his knots. Everything lasts longer when water is given fewer excuses. This is a mainstream truth of the valley. The storerooms are civic pride rendered in clay and line, as serious as a judge and as necessary as breakfast. Ledgers take the shape this city likes best. Ceilings, weight stones, and the kind of counting that makes fingers and fairness shake hands. A manager touches each sack with a stick tipped in soot, leaves a mark whose angle tells him which field it came from, then leans on the balance while assistants feed the pans with chert cubes 1, 2, for 8, then the small half-weights that tidy the result. When agreement settles, a clay puck receives the family seal. Fish, bull, unicorn, over knotted cord, and the sack inherits a little biography. Historians are still debating this question of whether particular sign pairs signal barley versus millet or household versus guild. But the day carries on without wagering on the answer. Dinner cares more about weight than theory. Kitchens celebrate with seriousness, because celebration here is a form of responsibility. Lentils soften into a golden kindness under turmeric's easy persuasion. Barley flour kneads into rounds that puff like proud cheeks on the griddle. Sesame presses leak their gloss into tiny dishes where bread will learn to be excellent. You sit on a low platform, legs folded, while a bowl the size of your two palms introduces itself as stew and then proves it's a story. Cardamom whispering. Coriander deciding, magnanimously, to help. A final squeeze of sour that wakes every sleepy taste bud into applause. A suite of jaggery and popped grain. Sticky planets glued into bite-sized galaxies. Passes along the row, and you swear to stop at 2, then break your promise with the 3rd and congratulate yourself on your flexible morals. Festivals fold into the feast without anyone needing to step aside to announce them. A handful of the first barley climbs into the shrine bowl. A plate of flatbread parks beside the lamp, and a ring of water encircles the hearth with the same quiet drama a boundary stone brings to a field. Musicians lift a reed flute and a frame drum. Neighbors lean into harmonies that go perfectly with eating. Children weave a chain of shell bangles into the fig tree's lower branches. Because even trees deserve jewelry on nights like this. The hired bull that trampled all afternoon receives a garland and an apple it pretends not to adore. The animal accepts applause like a veteran actor, bowing with the head and chewing with the soul. Storage keeps the second half of the season from shaking the first half by the shoulders. Jars, narrow-necked for oil, wide-bellied for grain, line up against walls like well-behaved cousins. Straw nests inside to cushion. Lids seat with a ring of ash that not only seals but discourages greedy insects. A smear of mustard oil along the rim adds a note pests prefer not to sing. A little fan of aromatic leaves tucks below the stopper because Grandma said bitterness educates mice. An odd, delightful trick travels in from upriver. A tiny perforated terracotta disc hangs inside the jar neck and tinkles when grain is poured, reminding everyone to pour slow, which somehow reduces waste. This may be science or superstition, and no one objects to either. Obscure as it sounds, a bead tied to a thread down the jar's center also helps judge fullness by sound when darkness borrows the room. Fermentation throws its arm around the party like a slightly eccentric uncle. Barley mash rests inside a tall jar wrapped with damp cloth, the surface dotted with a raft of toasted grain. Tomorrow it will introduce itself as a friendly, cloudy drink that forgives a long morning in the field. Milk hums toward yogurt in a cool corner. Curds hang in cloth bags that look like sleepy moons. Ghee clarifies in a pot so low a candle could warm it. Pickles. Mango sharp as gossip, onion sullen then sweet. Line a shelf in ceramic that remembers every brine and improves on them. Nothing in the room is waste. Everything is an ingredient waiting for the correct appointment. Drought, when it chooses to visit, knocks politely for one monsoon, then decides it enjoys the conversation. Wells lower their voices. The river puts on a belt too tight for comfort. Fields that once laughed at sun begin to listen to it with nervous respect. Rations step forward, not as punishment but as choreography changed to suit the new music. The granary opens on a schedule, and clay tokens etched with particular signs grant particular measures. 1 for a small household, 2 for the crowded, 3 for the people who are feeding old neighbors as if they were family because that is what they are. You stand in a slow, shaded line and watch the balance beam center itself as if it were deciding to be just today too. Responses gather from many shelves at once. Practical, ritual, and stubbornly cheerful. Canals receive a clean-out that borders on flattery. Roots of willows planted along banks a decade ago prove someone was thinking farther than most of us like to. Shade cloths stretch over seedbeds so the next crop learns perseverance rather than despair. In the courtyard, a bowl of water sits on the altar every dawn. Not to boss the sky, but to remind it that we are still on speaking terms. Historians are still debating this question of whether prolonged aridity across many seasons drove populations to relocate or merely to reorganize. In this season you reorganize because moving every pot and grandmother is a last resort and a poor one. Barges become long, Floating syllables in a sentence the city must pronounce clearly. We trade in what we need, we offer what we can spare. Grain arrives from a bend where rains behaved with better manners, its sacks greased against weather and gossip. In return, your neighbors send copper sheets, indigo cloth, shell bracelets polished until they flirt with starlight. Weights and measures do their perfect arithmetic. Seals stamp with the calm of a judge who actually read the case. A boy takes the corded neck of a jar and feels the callus forming on the inside of his fingers, the beginning of competence in the language of scarcity. Famine, if it tries graduating from drought, finds the city ready to argue. Millets step up from the backbench, hardy, swift, less glamorous than wheat but modestly heroic. Pulses diversify into soups that manage to be both humble and persuasive. Foraging becomes a course in botany taught by grandmothers with opinions. Tamarind pods surrender sour to keep appetites honest. Lotus stems offer crunch from shaded ponds when fields sulk. Seeds of amaranth, tiny as gossip, puff into porridge that refuses to apologize for being nutritious. A recipe travels the lanes. Roasted chickpea flour, ghee, jaggery, a pinch of salt. Roll into balls that travel well and keep for days. You make them eat one, save three, and feel oddly rich. Seasons, even in their mischief, still bring patterns that eyes trained by work can read. Winds shift earlier or later. Certain birds arrive with the precision of scribes. Ants carry grains up their hills in panic, and a farmer's nose reads dampness a day before the sky remembers it. Elders say plant a day after the first frog chorus so the soil stops pretending. Others insist on the third day after the first thunder so the seed gets its welcome with the right ceremony. Whether formal crop rotation existed as a citywide rule or as the accumulation of family habits, historians are still debating this question. You follow the habits you inherited because they have earned their right to be bossy. Herds serve as weather futures, milk now, meat seldom, manure always, and a store of value that walks itself to pasture. In dry months, families borrow grazing from one another with the same lazy generosity used to borrow a pot. Calves learn to drink from. Night leans over the rooftops like a patient singer taking a breath before the first note. And lanes that smelled of threshing now carry a sweeter mixture. Sesame smoke, lamp oil, cardamom, and the soft dust of dancing feet. Hearths fall to embers. Doors tilt inward just enough to admit cousins and neighbors. A reed mat unfurls with the authority of a stage. In this light that forgives even clumsy steps, a city that stacked bricks all day decides that rhythm is also a kind of architecture. From the granary square comes a pulse as regular as a good heart. Frame drums, skins stretched tight across wooden hoops, trade calls with a pair of clay kettles whose bellies answer in deeper tones. Fingers flick and mute with small, decisive touches, turning a simple beat into a conversation about walking, planting, grinding, and how to make a crowd breathe together. A child copies the pattern on his knees, missing the offbeat, then catching it, and the laughter that follows is the sort that trains courage without bruising it. Inside a courtyard polished smooth by so many mornings of sweeping, a singer stands with one foot on the threshold and the other on the earth, as if promising to keep both home and road in the same song. The melody begins low, the way a story begins when the teller is still choosing which wonder to reveal first. Your shoulders lower, your breath lengthens. Words coil in the air like smoke from a lamp, rising, thinning, then gathering into shapes that start to resemble animals. Heroes, riverbends. Across the riverbank, reed flutes add their clean, unashamed voices. Each tube holds a scale that prefers dusk to noon, notes spaced for human lungs rather than bravado. The players tilt their heads to catch the breeze and test how sound carries toward the water, where bullfrogs volunteer bass lines without waiting to be asked. A gourd rattle joins, pebbles sealed inside a dried shell, and the shush-shush becomes a soft rain behind the flutes, a reminder that rhythm is what happens when many small things agree to move at once. Under a fig tree whose leaves have memorized the steps to every festival, dancers draw a circle that tightens and loosens like a net around a quicksilver fish. Anklets stitched with tiny bells shake out silver punctuation marks along the beat. Palms clap not to demand attention but to offer it. A leader calls a step, the circle replies, and before long the lane has fused into one creature with many feet. If anyone forgets a turn, The circle hides the mistake with the elegant lie that generosity tells when it is happy. Beyond the lamplight, a storyteller clears his throat with the importance of a drum. Tonight's tale will need a long breath. A river spirit who traded certainty for curiosity and learned why banks exist. A bronzesmith's daughter who bargained with a stubborn wind. A bull who knew the names of all the stars and mispronounced none. Names matter more than geography in this world. Morals, when they show up at all, arrive late and sit politely in the back. You listen the way a thirsty courtyard listens to rain. Near the wall where lime plaster drinks moonlight into a soft halo, a bronze figurine with bangles stacked to the elbow glints from a shelf. A dancer cast long ago by hands that understood how a human back holds rhythm even at rest. Elders lifted down on rare nights to bless the first step, not because bronze confers authority but because memory does. The little figure refuses to smile or frown. It simply stands in that impossible balance between stillness and motion that every good singer knows how to hear. Along the lane, shells pressed to lips call out notes that travel farther than any drum can hope to. Conch trumpets, their mouths cut clean and their edges rubbed until they remember to be kind, send a long syllable over rooftops that stirs dogs into considering whether they should howl. Signals, starts, blessings. These horns do all three, depending on what the night asks. Some swear the sound scatters ill luck with the enthusiasm of children scattering sparrows. Others swear it mostly persuades latecomers to hurry. Historians are still debating this question of what role such horns played most often, and the air accepts both answers without hard feelings. Against a back wall rests a wooden harp-like frame strung with gut, its voice modest but persuasive when plucked by a patient thumb. Strings walk up and down scales that taste of river mist and tamarind. The instrument prefers patterns that repeat with small changes, like ripples lapping at pilings. Whether strings like these were common across all quarters or beloved mostly by a few houses that could spare the time, historians are still debating this question, and the strings respond by telling stories too lovely to verify. Past the gate where the street turns toward the docks, a chorus of work songs lifts in unison, the kind tailored to ropes, oars, and will ruts. Verses change with cargo. Refrains never do, because the refrain is the part that keeps the timing honest. A pull, a step, a breath. A pull, a step, a breath. Even the watchman's staff begins to keep time on the paving, tapping the downbeat with a professionalism that would make a reed flute jealous if reed flutes were capable of jealousy. Behind the shrine's low wall, a small ceremony stitches myth to meal. A platter holds a spiral of flatbreads that looks suspiciously like a galaxy. A bowl of lentils steams beside a lamp, and someone presses a seal into a pellet of clay and tucks it near the flame. The animal on the seal, bull, fish, unicorn, turns this into a sentence that means very roughly, let our fields and boats learn to sing together. Whether the pellet began life as bookkeeping or blessing, the household treats it as both, because food and faith prefer partnership to argument. Within the singing's ordinary wonder, an old story chooses tonight to wear a new coat. In this version, the river's patron is neither stern nor indulgent. It is curious. It asks children to tell it what the city smells like at noon, asks elders what the great tank thinks about when empty, asks lovers whether promise or surprise deserves the bigger bowl. Answers arrive in rhyme because rhyme is how you keep both memory and mischief from straying too far. The storyteller stops mid-sentence so a drum can make a joke, and laughter snaps in as cleanly as a well-drilled bead hole. Across the square, a musician lifts a small bell of bronze whose mouth knows exactly when to stop ringing. The note is short, shy of echo, perfect for signaling the moments when a dance changes partners or a tale changes worlds. Bells like these hang from ox yokes and from shrine eaves, from caravan poles and from children's belts on festival days. A small, satisfying fact rides in their hum. Alloys stiffen sound into shapes you can grab by the ear. Whether arsenic or tin sits in tonight's bell, someone here knows by taste in the air alone. Beyond the last row of lamps, the night grows bold with stars, and a woman who sings when she weaves offers a quiet chant that counts the visible lights along the ecliptic: fish star, bowl star, ladder star, using names old enough to have lost their reasons and kept their power. The children join, and the adults pretend not to be charmed by how well small voices fit this particular melody. Stories hold that heroes sail those lights twice a year, up and down, checking that every household kept its promises to its neighbors. Historians are still debating this question of whether such celestial catalogs carry math disguised as myth. The chant works either way, which is the chant's point. Beside the big tank, water answers music with a trick that never grows old. A frame drum pressed near the surface makes ripples that spin out in rings, catching the lamp's reflection and throwing a trembling moon onto the steps. Hand on drum, breath steady. The player learns that gentle makes the prettiest circles and impatient makes only splashes. Children crowd a step lower and experiment with their own palms, and the tank adopts every ripple without tiring of any. In a lane lined with drying cloth that now hangs like dark flags, a troupe performs a comic bit about a lazy harvest god who oversleeps and must be awakened by 99 kitchen spoons beating the backs of pots. The punchline lands when the god insists he will only wake for the 100th spoon, and the smallest child produces a ladle as long as his leg. The noise that follows ignores every rule and delights the gods into admitting failure. Some scholars insist such bits remember liturgies long gone. Others insist they are simply the kind of joke that helps hands keep from shaking when grain runs late. Historians are still debating this question, and the spoons, for their part, continue to be excellent percussion. Along the edge of the procession path, terracotta whistles shaped like birds sit in neat rows, each with a hole for the beak and one at the tail. When blown, they produce notes as cheeky as the birds they imitate, and a careful hand can coax a tiny scale by half covering the back hole. Children conduct orchestras of sparrows and cranes. Grandparents hide their smiles behind their hands and then fail and smile anyway. These little flutes do for melody what clay beads do for color. Give it a portable home. Behind the granary, an elder with a voice like baked brick recites a genealogical poem that swaps names for trades. Mother of waters, father of bricks, aunt of honey, nephew of fish. The rhythm fits the measure of the balance beam, and at every third name he flicks a pebble along a string as if weighing memory. This is a mainstream habit. First light finds the lanes wider than you remember, the kind of width created not by builders' generosity but by absence. Shop awnings remain rolled, cords slack as forgotten promises, and pigeons argue with themselves in doorways that stayed shut even after the cook fires woke. A stray cart will leans against a wall like a single sentence abandoned mid-thought. Listening closer than habit, you notice that the market's opening clatter, the good-natured metal and clay that usually clear their throats at dawn, has declined to speak. Somewhere a door thuds softly and stays closed, its latch bound with a loop of reed and a pellet of clay pressed by a seal you know well. The animal on that impression, the familiar unicorn with its horn held like a quill, faces left as if it too were turning away. Inside, jars rest on mats. A last meal waits for hands that have chosen distance over repetition. You trace the mark with a finger and wonder whether sealing a door comforts anyone or merely persuades dust to respect proprietors who have already decided to become travelers. Across the square, the well's rope now carries an extra knot for depth, a practical confession that water travels farther from your bucket than it did last season. Buckets scrape stone with a longer sigh. Wrists lengthen their reach. Everyone learns new leverage without asking to. A boy counting hand over hand fumbles at the knot and laughs because laughter is the only tool that always fits. When the bucket returns, the water tastes faintly of iron. Older, perhaps, or simply more insistent. Along the quay, mooring posts keep their manners, standing straight with coils of rope that should be busy but are not. Sandbars wink in places where they used to nod. The river rehearses channels with the enthusiasm of a storyteller inventing a cousin. Boatmen measure drafts with cords more often than before, and their brows confess calculations they once did in their sleep. Whether the river has shifted its loyalty or simply asked for new negotiations, historians are still debating this question, and the current declines to argue beyond the language of silt. Between shuttered stalls, a pigeon quiet settles in, different from ordinary laziness and heavier than rain. Weight stones sit in tidy families on a mat whose owner has not unrolled his scale. The smallest cube nudges its neighbor as if seeking a roll. You pick it up and it feels like the weight of a sentence you are not ready to say. When you set it down, That soft click lands inside your chest with the sound of fairness waiting for a customer who might not arrive. Inside a brick courtyard, a hearth cools deliberately as a woman lifts embers into a travel pot. Small and thick, with a snug lid and a belly suited to carrying fire without scorning sleep. A child blows carefully. A thread of smoke accepts the road as a fact of the next hour rather than a threat. The house exhales, noticing that heat has temporarily resigned its post. You feel the ache of departure most acutely in this practical migration of flame. Where the hearth goes, the home follows. Outside the potter's yard, wheels are stacked rim to rim like suns, setting on a horizon they adore but no longer intend to cross. Fresh jars stand in neat ranks. Their skins still thirsty for the oils and grains they will not meet in this neighborhood. An apprentice chalks a tally on the wall and then rubs it out with his palm, leaving a smear that reads as a decision. Kills doze, heatless but not empty. Their brick mouths look like old storytellers refusing to speak because the audience had other appointments. Soon the granary will rehearse a different choreography, one conducted by rations and not by appetite. Ceilings pile in a bowl near the chute. Broken bulls, broken fish, broken unicorns. Proof that doors opened honestly and sacks left with a nod. A steward runs a thumb along the rim of a chert weight and stares at the ledger cord not because he doubts it, but because cords and stones are steadier companions than weeks that keep changing their minds. When he ties the last knot of the morning, the gesture feels like placing a period after a paragraph that wrote itself. Already rumors travel faster than carts, hopping lanes like sparrows. Someone says the upland pastures promised more kindness. Someone says the canal upstream learned bad habits. Someone says a family left because cousins called them home to plant where soil remembers rain. You shrug with the city. All of these can be true, and none have to be the only truth. Historians are still debating this question of whether drought or trade or a river's wanderlust pushed the first household to name their leaving. And the lanes show you that individual answers band together into a chorus regardless. At the threshold of a beadmaker's shop, trays sit covered with cloth that keeps dust polite, and a single string of carnelian waits like a sentence missing its last word. Etched beads blush red from the hearth's last good firing, white vines curling through their surfaces in patterns that once played at being secret. A customer steps in, admires, then shakes his head with a half-smile that forgives both of them. Payment in this mood is measured more by memory than by binary stones. By the dockside basin, a shallow ladder of silt slides where a deep tongue of water used to lick the brick. Steps to the platform where a shine no feet have refreshed this week. Ringstones wait without complaint because that is the only way they know to wait. A botryte oils a seam anyway, because habits become oaths if you keep them long enough. Whether this basin ever served as a true dockyard or also as a civic bath with good PR, historians are still debating this question, and the bricks manage not to choose between functions while choosing to endure. Under a fig tree, a low altar holds ash patterns brushed carefully into the shape of a spiral that widens toward the lane. Grain kernels dot the curve like stars in an argument. A small oil lamp burns steady even as the breeze tries to reduce everything to generalities. A grandmother presses her seal into a pellet and tucks it in the niche, the fish and 3 firm signs, because charm and accounting refuse to walk separate roads today. The family's bundles wait by the gate, shoulders height tall, heads of spears disguised as walking sticks tucked inside because precaution likes to be subtle. Beyond the west wall where cattle trails begin to braid themselves into routes, a caravan forms with the considerate noise of leather, rope, and animals who suspect change but will not make a fuss if hay continues to be delicious. Oxen choose their pace, low and reasonable. Donkeys vote for half steps and win. Dogs appoint themselves committee. Friends embrace in the way people do when distance will be counted in weeks, not in myth. A girl adjusts her shell bangles until they ring confidence instead of goodbye. Within the seal carver's workshop, the day's stone sits on a mat and does not object when the chert blade stays in its sleeve. Mirror writing waits on the palette of the carver's mind. Animal first or script first, border now or last, the steady habits of a life that will need to fit into a smaller bag. A new commission, a seal for a well guild in a village upriver. Rests half done, its creature part fish, part fountain, all wish. Whether the guild will wait or find another carver closer to their own water, The stone offers neither hurry nor complaint. After the third hour, the music that often finds its way into lanes chooses a pocket-sized scale. A frame drum, carried by its rim as if it might spook, keeps time with the tap of a watchman's staff on paving stones. Tick, tick, remember, remember. A flute follows with a melody that prefers corners to squares, making kindness to the echo rather than to empty air. Your feet measure their own reluctance. Your breath patterns itself against a rhythm that forgives everything except lies. Before the heat acquires its noon ambition, a family heat seals their memory to the walls. Children draw fish and bulls and ladders and charcoal on plaster that will not long ignore rain. Mothers mark heights on the lintel with a knife point. Fathers brush a thin band of indigo at shoulder height in the courtyard. The old trick that convinces heat not to stare too hard. These marks are not instructions for return. They are the sentences you leave in a book you loved when you must stop reading before the last page. Later, strangers will run hands along these skins of thought and nod with the respect of readers who do not skip to the end. Late afternoon notices that cats have opinions about departure. One sits on a rolled mat and refuses to vacate. Another patrols the rim of a grain jar with exaggerated professionalism, as if to prove the job remains worth doing. A dog practices the art of becoming impossible to leave behind by lying exactly where wheels hope to roll. In the end, of course, animals follow people, sulking or preening as species require, and the city inherits a more articulate silence for an hour. Neighbors who plan to remain a while longer walk the lanes with brooms and pots of lime, refusing the easy drama of letting dust decide the story. Drains receive their midweek confession. Inspection slabs lift and settle with their old lucid click. A boy in charge of the reed bundle looks taller because responsibility makes many people taller. Nobody calls this ritual heroic, nobody needs to. Everyday courage prefers anonymity and the lingering scent of lime. Families who leave exchange tokens with those who stay. A chert weight with softened corners. A well bucket with a clever splice repaired so beautifully it looks like decoration. A terracotta whistle shaped like a crane that still hits the sweet notes. Gifts like these do not pretend to be charms. Dawn folds itself over the floodplain in strips of pale copper, and the first sound that touches your ear is not a rooster or a cart wheel but the dry rustle of reeds that forgot how to be green. Shade at the well looks thinner than last year. Ring stones, rubbed smooth by many palms, hold a temperature that tells the truth about the night's stinginess. A sip confirms what your wrists already guessed when they lifted the bucket. Water still comes, but it has acquired that metallic afterthought that makes tongues polite. Instinct has you count the pulls on the rope, and the number grows a little longer than habit remembers. Beneath the lanes where covered drains once bragged about their clever slopes, small silences collect. Puddles that should be raucous are shy instead. Trickles that used to gossip have turned laconic. You lift an inspection slab and smell a season that forgot its manners. The city's arteries remain intact, brick lips pressed precisely together as ever, but less water enters the conversation. A rod chases a sulking clot of silt and wins. A worker wipes his hands and smiles with the gallows humor of people who understand systems and seasons are cousins who sometimes quarrel. Across the fields, furrows carve lines into a soil that sifts through your fingers like ground memory. Millet lifts its stubborn heads anyway, cheerful as a child that never learned fear. Barley considers a moment longer, stiff with suspicion. Cotton whispers that it will do what it can, provided the sky keeps at least half of last year's promises. A curtain of dust kicks along the far contour, low and lazy, like goats taking an evening stroll even though the sun just woke. Proof that wind has volunteered for extra duty. Planting follows its schedule but alters its tone. Fewer jokes, more nods. Along the river bend, the water presents a new shoulder as if modeling an outfit you didn't ask to see. Sandbars rise where deep runs used to grin. The main current experiments with a side channel and forgets to apologize afterward. Boatmen test with knotted cords twice instead of once. Oars angle differently. Rope burns appear in the places old sailors call less honorable but extremely informative. Whether a tectonic nudge tilted the plane or the monsoon's long breath simply shortened, you cannot say. You only know that your feet memorize the new soft spots before your tongue invents names for them. Between the market's brick jetty and the reed-clotted margin, A mooring post topples with a resigned thud that puts a comma into everyone's sentence. Merchants adjust their scales as if reassurance can be weighed. Weight stones still click in perfect binary, and that sound, trust made audible, soothes you more than any speech could. A botryte oils seams and stares at the brown glass of shallow water where blue used to live. Whether this basin ever truly deserved the name of dockyard or only played at it part-time, historians are still debating this question, and meanwhile silt keeps voting. Outside the north gate where the ground always felt like bread fresh from the oven, a crack opens and sighs in your direction. Not a chasm, nothing dramatic, just a hairline that repeats itself one brick's length at a time along a wall meant to keep goats honest. A tremor must have practiced its scales beneath the plain. Later you will hear old women speak of a night when water jars rang like small bells no one meant to touch. Today, you kneel and press your palm to the bricks. The heat living there is not sunlight. It is the body heat of the city thinking about balance. Inside courtyards that used to smell of wet plaster and cooking lentils at dawn, ash cools under tidy mounds because fires begin later to save fuel. A ring of water around the hearth grows thinner and fainter. The lamp's wick learns to coax light out of stinginess without sulking. You stir a pot and hear grain settle with a deeper sigh than last month. This is not panic. This is the low discipline of families who understand how to feed 6 with 4 and make the difference taste like spice. Under a fig whose roots have always known where to find secrets, the libation bowl hums at a pitch only patient ears notice. The pour into the perforation feels longer this morning because your hand slows itself, eking out the measure as if speech should follow fewer words. A small garland leans on the rim like a tired promise. Whether the stand before the unicorn on certain seals once meant incense or grain or the polite measurement of hope, historians are still debating this question, but your fingers choose a handful of sesame anyway and let it fall with the modest drama of sincerity. Beyond the western fields, the canal that had behaved superbly for 2 generations starts drawing letters backward. A right-angle turn, once obedient to the engineer who taught it manners, now invites a playful overture from the current. Revetments mutter, and willow fascines raise their eyebrows. Work crews arrive with baskets, jokes, and the practiced choreography that teaches silt how to be useful again. Scoop, haul, spill, stomp. Repeat until the channel remembers its purpose. A reed flute somewhere tries a hopeful scale. You forgive the optimism because optimism keeps ankles light. Meanwhile, the sky plays at being a minimalist poet. Clouds arrive thin as onion skins, argue briefly with sunlight, and vanish before deciding who won. Distant thunder recites a poem on the wrong side of the horizon. You smell rain twice and receive dew once, and neither feeds a field. Elders point with chins at ants reinforcing their doors and at birds flying lower than courtesy allows. Their eyebrows supply commentary nobody else dares to say out loud. Whether this is the start of a long sulk or merely the tantrum of a single season, nobody knows, and the not knowing is the grit between thought and sleep. Near the granary, ceilings pile higher than usual because distribution has learned a stricter grammar. A steward ties knots with a beauty that feels like law. A clerk counts aloud and glosses his own words with a small drum of the finger on the balance beam. Rations go out, not ungenerously, but with the sort of modest ceremony that convinces appetite to behave like a guest rather than a raider. You take your measure and thank the room as though it were a person. The room accepts thanks without flinching, a skill developed by rooms that keep promises. Elsewhere upriver, rumors walk faster than caravans. A tributary failed its appointment 2 moons running. A town raised its streets one course to pretend it still liked the flood. A cluster of wells found salt where sweetness should sit. Salinity nips at the tongue like a small, irritating fly, and fields near the sea grow sullen around their edges. Mangroves steal forward and claim their rights with a lawyer's patience. Fishermen nod gravely and adjust their nets. Farmers stare at a new grammar and sharpen their hoes to underline emphasis. Above the old mound where potter's shards pretend to be petals, wind writes scrolls nobody asked for. Dunes creep 1 brick length in a week, flattening the low walls of a cattle pen, then change their minds as easily as a child switching games. You step where a lane used to be and your ankle reads the new topography before your eyes do. Sand has its own bureaucracy. A committee of grains meets at your sandal strap and votes to climb higher. You decline the nomination with a brisk shake. After a short night punctuated by small jars creaking as they cool, dawn finds you at the river again, measuring with eyes that grew older while you slept. The most brazen sandbar now wears reeds like a crown, which means it has no intention of leaving soon. Boatmen who bragged, accurately, that they could pilot blind now squint with the honesty of new students. The river answers with a shrug you feel more than see. Whether a once mighty ancestral channel withdrew its patronage from this stretch is the sort of problem scholars will love when centuries make it safe to love. Today you test depth and accept instruction. Around the city's heart, the great tank holds less of the sky than it used to, and the line where wet plaster dries leans lower on the stairs. Steps still welcome feet. Water still welcomes thought. The shimmer still hosts its quiet festival of lamp reflections in the evening. Yet you stand one tread lower for ablutions and pretend you always liked that view better. Historians are still debating this question of whether such tanks were primarily ritual or civic or a braid of both. Every bucket that descends argues for civic even as every whispered vow argues for ritual, and the tank keeps its practiced neutrality. Behind the bead quarter, a kiln door yawns cool 3 mornings in a row. Carnelian sits unfired because firewood has been asked to perform more miracles with soups than with stone. A boy traces etched patterns on a dried, unfired bead and whispers them a promise about tomorrow's heat. Tools learn patience. Hands learn how to keep skill from rusting without wasting a stroke. You count drills, ribs, paddles, weights, you count breaths. You count seasons since a certain kind of confidence last woke before you did. Beside the outer embankment, engineers teach water to be polite by reminding it where paths used to be. Clay gets tamped in layers the way verses get recited, carefully with breath at the right places. Spill channels receive the courtship they deserve. Cleaned, widened, coaxed with small stones placed like commas. When the river finally tests these sentences with a half-hearted rise, the embankment makes the old case without bluster and wins. A few families clap without meaning to. The river pretends not to notice and tries a different argument 2 bends downstream. Throughout the lanes, household experiments blossom because dusk pours itself into the lanes like steep tea, and stone learns again how to hold the day's last heat without boasting. A low wind rearranges ash in the hearths and finds the tiny grooves carved by years of footsteps, pausing in each one as if to take attendance. Lamps answer the hour with ovals of light, small as cupped hands, large enough to gather faces. On plaster, your shadow leans and straightens, a companion that knows the choreography even when you do not. Wind roams the courtyards with the curiosity of an archivist, riffling reed mats, nudging grain marks in the sweep of ash, sampling the breath left in jars after supper. The air writes footnotes on every surface, marginalia you can read with fingertips alone. A loop where a child swung a spindle and set it down. A swirl where someone laughed while drawing water. A set of straight, disciplined strokes across a threshold where a broom remembered its lesson. Each trace explains nothing and proves everything. Footsteps choose the old rhythm because the ground prefers that meter. Heels land where curbs bend. Toes rise where drains whisper. Arches adjust to brick courses the way voices adjust to familiar songs. On the paving, pale flecks of shell in the mortar blink back at you like tiny, unembarrassed stars. Every corner carries a smell that used to have a name and now has a direction. South for sesame, west for fish, north for dye, east for clay. So you navigate by scent the way sailors navigate by wind. Shadows slip over ringstones by the wells, the donut shapes passing slowly from ivory to slate as the moon begins to guess at its role. Hands have polished these circles to a softness that belongs to living things. You press your palm there and feel the city's habit travel up your wrist like a reassurance. One rope groove glitters damp from recent use and then dries while you watch, time compressed into the length of a single breath held and released. Somewhere a frame drum practices quiet, the kind that counts rather than conquers. The beat trickles over brick like a stream searching a path. When it meets a step, it lifts itself to clear the edge and continues without complaint. Anklet bells join a moment later not to announce dancers but to remind the dust that it, too, has grace. Listening settles your shoulders into that posture you know well by now, the one that says the body remembers even when the mind tires of proofs. Underneath a fig tree whose leaves have argued with every season in kindness, a low platform keeps its respectful geometry. Ash spirals from this morning's rite have softened at the edges. A few grains of millet still glint where fingers could not bring themselves to retrieve them. The libation bowl wears a tiny collar of dried water around its perforation. Stone's version of rings on a tree. When you tilt, the reflection of the lamp breaks, mends itself, and breaks again, the way sentences behave in homes where many people talk without trying to win. Against the market's sleeping awnings, the memory of bargaining lingers like spice. Scale pans hang straight, their thin chains taut with ordinary dignity. Weight stones drowse in cloth pockets, dreams full of clicks and nods. When you touch a chert cube, the chill informs you that neutrality is comfort. How reliable it has been, this little grammar of fairness, translating passions into numbers and returning them to laughter. Beyond the jetty where water rehearsed kindness and stubbornness in equal parts, brick steps continue to prefer right angles. A ring stone embedded in the quay still offers a loop for rope to learn patience from. Reed by lamp, the surface shows the faint gloss of 1,000 hulls' hesitations. The basin's outline invents a ship from moonlight and extinguishes it with the simple physics of a cloud crossing the lamp's eye. Inside a storeroom whose door carries the cool of thick clay, the smell of sesame and cumin and old rope chooses to live in the darkness with intention. Ceilings clink in a bowl, broken and somehow still whole as evidence. Lifting one shard, you feel the boss's thumbprint. A small, oval authority. Press against your skin, and the animal in relief returns your gaze with the comic solemnity of old friends. Whether that shard certified millet or oil or a promise offered in a hurry, you can no longer tell. Its certainty remains undiminished by your ignorance. Across the bead quarter, silhouettes of drying trays stage their elongated play. Carnelian discs haloed in chalky residue flash dull reds in the lamplight, like embers pretending to be fruit. Etched lines hold the white of ash and the memory of heat, delicate and unapologetic. A drill lies at rest, its chert point dark, the bow still looped with cord. You imagine the work waiting inside the tool like breath that will resume when rhythm returns to the wrist that taught it. Between two lane walls rubbed to warmth by generations of shoulders, script scratches climb and drift. Marks on pot rims, on lentils, on a reused sliver of ivory. Each sign faces the same way and also its own way. Each pair wants the partners it has always wanted. Right to left to right, whichever the carver chose, the words keep their grace, and you respect that indecipherable honesty without feeling obliged to win it a translation tonight. Historians are still debating this question of whether these lines captured the fullness of speech or the lean of account, and the plaster stays beautiful while they take their time. Above the granary platform, the night sky repeats its own familiar inscription in stars, a line you almost read this season. Parallels and diagonals draw themselves with a competence no scribe could match on clay. A faint band suggests a road where no cart has the nerve to wheel. Your lips count without sound. Fish star, jar star, ladder star, bull star. Names hold long enough to get you to the end of the list and then let go, the way good ropes do when they have brought a boat home. Afterward, your feet take you along the street where kills exhaled and coppers sang. The doors stand gentle, mouths black and cool, but the walls retain that faint, sweet breath of ash and mineral that says this is a place where heat taught matter to endure. A kiln arch reflects lamplight like a ghee-glossed loaf. You incline your head the way people do when leaving a room that has been kind to them. In this quiet, you hear tools remembering their tasks, a soft chorus of again, again. Before the river's turn, a low wall breaks to admit a reed-choked passage once declared a shortcut. Water now stutters there, sovereignty diminished but still animated by gravity's old affection. When you crouch, frogs call out their small surprises from the shadow of a brick, and a snail, earnest as a new clerk, draws a silver sentence across a stone that used to be a threshold. Nothing here has resigned. Everything has edited. Sometimes a gust travels the lane with purpose and leaves every small flame taller for a heartbeat, as if telling the lamps, stand up, I'm watching. Wicks accept the test, lean, recover, and continue working with the fastidious attention that good habits expect from themselves. A moth bumps, repents, circles again, an allegory so obvious you forgive it its sincerity. On nights like this, the city feels nearer to you than your own name. Memory sits on the steps by the great tank and rearranges its shawl until the pattern suits the hour. A muscled worker's hands tighten a rope in your mind. A scholar's finger traces a sign's invisible companion. A potter's thumb smooths a rim that never cracked again after that day. A beadmaker's drill sings in the old, calming pitch. The tank answers by performing its oldest miracle, the act of receiving a reflection and returning it slightly altered, kinder than truth but not less true. Silence gathers at the corners of drains, unoffended by working water that has less to say. Where the cover slabs meet cleanly and the capstones lift without sulking, the hush feels proud, a dignity earned by function performed precisely. When your toe touches a seam, the dry click answers with familiarity, and the lane's narrow echo congratulates both of you for knowing your tasks. No speech achieves this level of agreement. Stories find you whether you look for them or keep your eyes on the paving. A woman carrying a jar passes and leaves behind a wake of ginger and basil. A man with a reed mat over his shoulder leaves a wake of lime and rain. A child with a bull whistle leaves breath shaped into a smile. Every trail knots with another and another until an evening is braided around your chest like a sash. The weight noticeable but welcome. This is what it feels like when a city wears its history right up against its skin. Hands reach for tools resting where the sun last left them. An adze too honest to rust. A rib too loyal to warp. A bowl that refuses to become mere decor. The grip remembers whether to pinch or cradle, whether this one liked water on it or preferred to be persuaded dry. You put the tool down in exactly the spot your hands tell you is correct and feel the satisfaction of not correcting yourself. Work waits politely. It has the good manners that come from being central rather than decorative. Bricks accept their night work. They keep rooms square, roofs level, wells round, drains true. Mortar binds, but it is the brick that decides whether the joint is a handshake or a shrug. You lay your palm on a course that once carried the corner of a loom and imagine warp threads humming themselves to sleep. Standard sizes please geometry in daylight. At night they please